Okay, everybody, good morning.
The metaphor going.
All right, so let's get started, right? So we're going to dive in. We have a semi-awkward situation with Zoom. So we have about 6 people on Zoom, but they only are hearing on my computer microphone, right? So when we have little presentation pieces, I'm going to ask you to come and switch out with Brittany. They can hear fine. So welcome everybody, right? My name is David Burrell. I'm with Future IQ, so we're helping facilitate this process. Let's go around the room and do quick introductions, right? Just face and name, and we won't have to do this every time, but let's start with you, Annie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annie Decker. I'm with VCP. I'm helping with a lot of the kind of project management of this process. So excited to be here. We've been putting in a lot of work to get to this point. Excited to really start talking about it and sharing it out more broadly. I also want to just make sure everyone knows we do have coffee and donuts and snacks and seltzers over here. So please help yourself anytime and grab what you need.
Thanks, Annie. I'm Becca. I work for the Forest Parks and Recreation Department, and the Wi-Fi stuff is up there too if you need it.
Gunnar Ernie, my office is with FDR, and password to the Wi-Fi is all lowercase.
Building a free intro.
I'm Ryan Patch. I work for the Vermont Agency of Agriculture and Food Markets, where I'm a policy manager focusing on climate change and land use development areas.
Morning, everybody. I have nothing to add on the Wi-Fi. Ian Osborne, Director representing Connected Lands at Nature Conservancy 2.0, as we've been saying. Nice to see you.
Morning, Jamie Fidel. I'm a Forest and Wildlife Program Director at Vermont Natural Resources Council. Good to see you all.
Thanks, Jamie.
Should we go to the hi everyone, Evan Horn. I'm with the Vermont Climate Action Office.
Morning, Bob Dano with Vermont Fish and Wildlife.
Greg Sino with the Green Mountain Clear Lakes National Forest.
Okay.
Great. Tasha Wallace with the Will County Planning Commission. I'm representing the regional planning commissions, and actually really I'm just pretending to be Chris Campany today. So.
You're what we call you.
They call me Chris.
Okay, great. I'm Nick Bennett. I'm the chair of the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council. I'm also the executive director of the Vermont Mountain Life Association.
Good morning, everybody. Trey Martin from the Housing and Conservation Board. I'm the Conservation and Rural Community Development Director there.
I'm Billy Coster. I'm the Director of Planning and Policy for the Agency of Natural Resources.
Good morning, Jim Shallow. I'm the Director of Resilient Connected Lands of Nature Conservancy for the next couple of weeks.
Emily Alger. I was with the Central Land Trust for quite a long time, and I recently left that position, and I'm working with the Center for Whole Communities.
Alex Smith, backcountry hunters and anglers.
I'm Brittany Rempy. I'm with Future IQ, so I'll be bopping around taking photos and stuff.
And can you just tell us who's on Zoom?
Yes, we have Helen on Zoom, Helen Wagonboard. We have Isaac Bissell. We have Rich Holshoe, sorry, I apologize. And Tracy Zhao. And that's it. And Celine from Future IQ, my apologies. We've got our COO from Future IQ online as well, helping us take notes and everything.
All right, and for the guys on Zoom, only Brittany and I can see you, right? So it was very nice that you waved, but only we could see that. So just know that. And if you want to say something during the course of this, put your hand up, and we may not see it, but we'll try and keep an eye on it.
Yep.
We'll just let Shelby in.
Yeah, Shelby just texted that she'll stay on
I
Zoom,
can't get
but
that.
can switch to Teams if we need her to.
I get that.
We won't.
Brittany, why?
Yeah. Maybe click here. Click into Zoom over.
Yeah.
Here, click. We're really good at technology.
Yeah, we're trying our best, right? Here we go.
There we go. Okay.
Okay.
And now we also have Shelby.
Okay. So we've got a little bit of program. Does everybody have an agenda in front of them? Okay, cool. So we've got a number of items here. As we go through, we've got a couple of sort of prompt slides. We've allowed a little bit of time, and you'll see on each one of these slides, there'll be a little red box with an approximate amount of time that we're going to allow for this, right? The bulk of the discussion today is going to be around the objectives and the pathways, and we want Annie and Becca and Trey to talk us through those. And that's really the sort of the meat of our discussion. But there's a lot of stuff that's been going on, so that we want to give you an update both of what's been happening, but also what's coming up, right? So there's a series of sort of update and briefing sections. And Trey, this might be one for you to sort of lead us off with a little bit too. One of the things that was asked at the Zoom meeting was about the connection between phase one and how that work feeds into this phase. And you sort of gave a very kind of sort of brief overview of that, right? But I thought it'd be good just to talk a little about the work since phase one and how that is informing phase two, if you wanted to just kind of walk people through that. And we'll have a little bit of a Q&A on this as well. But again, it's really just a briefing and an update, and then we'll keep going through the agenda. Thanks, Trey.
So hello, everybody, again online. Hope that this is working. Thanks for your patience with the audio. And hey, everybody, thanks for coming today. This is, it was really exciting to see you on Zoom last time. It's really exciting to be here today. It's really exciting to be moving forward. I think what we have had about 8 months since we did a second kind of turn of the inventory last summer and kind of re-release that to the website. You've seen the links for that and the page that VHCB had that will be replaced by the portal Future IQ has created. But we didn't just kind of sit down at the end of September and say, okay, we'll wait till the federal government allows us to move forward. We've done a lot of activities since then. I wanted to overview some things VHCB has done, some things ANR has done, some things that partners have done, and then kind of come back to how that helped us to bridge from that inventory phase to what we're heading into right now. If I had to sum it up, though, is that what we've really done, and we've taken advantage of the time, including the pause that did happen once the federal administration came in and there was a lot of chaos around our funding for this, and so we were paused. But even through that, we were continuing to really think, how do we take what we learned in the inventory, which was a pretty massive response from stakeholders who participated in terms of the volume of information and the breadth of topics that people found interesting in connection to Act 59. So how do we synthesize that and reconcile it into a meaningful and actionable plan that's true to this legislative charge, right? This is not a legislative charge to fix the full every conservation program. It's not a legislative charge to really promote food security or the Forest Future Roadmap or the state's, stepping forward on the SCORP and the Move Forward Together. Sorry, I couldn't get the words out, but it needs to uplift those. And that's what we've been spending a lot of time is to think, how do we take this statute and use it to uplift the things that are already happening? And that was the realization that kind of kept developing for us as we were working on setting up this second phase, is that we need to maintain those connections that we want people to see themselves into and continue to read themselves into the work. But we want them to do it from where they're working. So if you're working on food security, you need a secured land base. If you're working on recreation or land access, you want to protect that land and understand how to steward it going forward. So that was the sort of the major innovation between September and now, is how to frame this as we go forward.
Right onto Kelly Road.
Here's some more specific things that happened over the last 8 months. At ANR, a team led by Bob Zano and others met with a group of internal and external stakeholders and produced a really detailed analysis of the conserved lands inventory that we published last year, overlaying that with conservation design in order to tease out what the highlights and spotlights should be as we go forward. So that work translated directly into the objective one and the pathways that you see there. It was a big body of work, a really deep dive in something that was important. At the same time, while Gannon was still there, he was leading a group of the data managers from across state government and at partners to determine how are we going to be preparing not only this plan, but preparing to do the second inventory release, which is due at the same time we expect to have the plan done, which is June 30, 2026. So continuing to think about the data protocols, the governance, and the way that data is uploaded into that to track, and then beginning to also think about how do we make this user-friendly and experientially, valuable for landowners and groups, et cetera. ANR also convened a group to go through ANR's programs that might have relevance to our question about 50 by 50. As we talked about last time, the 30 by 30 goal that is set before us is for permanent legal conservation, probably mostly generally in conservation easements or public ownership of land with easements on it or otherwise. The 50 by 50 goal can also include, not the majority, but it can include long-term durable protections for land. And so what ANR did is take a really good look at all the programs across the agency that create long-term, durable, accountable protection for land. Yes.
One amendment to that, that group also looked at some federal programs.
And so there's a lot more acres that are protected under those kinds of programs that we'll be talking about as we go through this process. So really helpful to tee that up. Also, people from VHCB, ANR, and lots of your groups have been participating in the adjacent Act 250 conversations about Tier 3, among others, which have some relevance potentially to that 50 by 50 question. Partners have been doing, across the board, partners have taken the language of Act 59 into the way that they talk about land protection. When I say partners, I mean, especially land trusts and conservation organizations, but also advocates who are working on this are thinking in terms of forest reserves now, thinking in terms of biodiversity management areas, natural resource management areas. So beginning to rethink the work we do in the language of the bill, because that's the language we're going to use to track it going forward. TNC also launched a program earlier this year, where they are doing, they have some of their funding and some other private funding. They put it together to support other partners who are doing specifically biodiversity based conservation. And so that's an example of something that pushes right at those categories from the Act, the biodiversity conservation areas, the forest reserve areas, as well as protecting places, sensitive areas in the natural resource management. At VHCB, we took the time to we looked at almost every 30 by 30 initiative around the world, and we distilled what we liked about those, and the objectives and pathways formula that we used for you is based on that research, and it comes from California, from Maryland in particular, from Maine, but we have a lot of data available. During this process, we'll talk to you about how to make that available to people, to stakeholders. We looked at all the other and tabulated, and you have it now, an annotated guide to other relevant plans in Vermont. So those plans that we want to uplift. And we did a sort of and Gannon did this too for the agency. We went through the whole inventory, all the priority actions, and sort of red light, green lighted those and said, which of these are look like actionable items for what we want to do, and which of these are actually taking place elsewhere and not, we need to acknowledge that these activities are taking place, but it isn't the focus of Act 59. We made some really big capacity investments in the last year too, to the agency to help with long range management planning, to Trust for Public Land and Cold Hollow to Canada, increase their ability to do land protection. We piloted a rivers program where we gave planning money to Two Rivers Ottaquechee to work with towns to develop resilience plans and then to draw down FEMA funding for those. It's a little different than what VACB normally does. We worked with partners in ANR to develop the capacity of sole hold easements on state-owned land to eliminate some of the burdens with having multiple easement holders. And most recently, we've invited American Farmland Trust to hone their farmlands under threat analysis and to be able to bring that into our conversations. So all of that, again, that's the work we've done to take that raw material to say what's essential and what isn't. How do we uplift those contiguous efforts? How do we, especially, I think the most important theme that I heard in this was how do we focus on capacity, creative financing, especially at a time when our assumptions about federal funding are really turned upside down, and how to bring communities into this. Seems to us that at this time when federal partners are going to be at a weak ebb of the ability to fund, that we want to find innovations that pull communities and conservation commissions and regional planning commissions toward this to develop other ways to protect land. And most importantly, and David will come back to this, we thought a lot about how to be really clear from the outset about roles, responsibilities, and decision making. That was confusing in phase one. It's something it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle when you've sort of begun one way and try to explain to people, okay, well, this is a loose decision making. That didn't work very well. So this is, David said this last time, what we would like to invite you all to do is to be here to help us refine materials, present materials, especially think about the messaging that goes into this, but also to help us as ambassadors of this. All of that implies that you would learn what's ANR and VHCB have put together, that you would help us question it, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, but that the role of the TAC and the goals for today are not so much redebating these things as much as saying, how do we communicate the questions that are still out there? How do we bring general audiences into this? How do we make sure that people understand some of the nuances, because there's still a lot of, Tasha and I talked about this at the other, there's a lot of confusion among just, the non-professional conservation communities out there.
Perfect. So I will along. It was perfect. So I do want to, I am going to walk through sort of clarification around roles and responsibilities and how we see all the pieces working together, right? But any questions to Trey in terms of what he's covered, in terms of like that sort of line of work that's really flowed out of phase one into this point? Okay. Good job.
Sorry,
Thanks.
restate the question. I'm sorry, I got distracted for a second. Can you just re-say what you just said? I didn't hear you.
Any questions
Questions?
on what I just laid out?
Okay, got it. I do have a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You said that this is not a time to re-debate, but it is a time to reframe the questions people have. So can you help me understand?
Can we say that? Let me try to say that.
So let me, if you could, let me go through the next piece, right? Because I think that might help clarify things a little bit, right? And then we can come back to revisit that, right? So you're good?
I'm good.
Okay, all right. So let's dive into the next piece, right? And I think, because what I want to do is I want to build out a little about what the role is. And I think what Trey just opened up is that this has got a different tempo at this phase, right? This is a more intentional driving towards producing an outcome, which is a roadmap and real clarity about how it moves forward. This part of the agenda, and we'll take about 15 minutes. So I've got some material I want to show you and talk about how we see this process working, what the role of the TAC is relative to working groups, to regional stakeholders, to the project team, and so on. But there's a few things I want to hit on here. I want to talk about how we're going to organise the public-facing work. I want to talk about the timeline and the roles of the various organisations and how these work packages flow together. What I've got in the background here, as Trey mentioned, we've been building a project portal, and that's just gone up in its sort of skeleton form. It's basically a website that's devoted to this project, right? And has a homepage has key groups and resources and so on. We're going to build that out over time. And you're going to see a lot of linkage to that, right? That's where we want to drive people to. If they've got questions about the process or what's going on or what's coming up or who we want to drive them to that portal. So that becomes the public facing repository. To your role in terms of being sort of a public facing piece of this, we are going to do interviews with you. We want to try and grab little cameos with you. Brittany's got all her gear here. So, get your hair sort of slicked up and get ready, right? But we are going to do JPEGs and quotes and things like that. You can see examples of that on other projects we've done. But we do really want to give a lot of voice to the experts who are in this room and are in other parts of the process about why this is important, how we're going about it. So we're going to lead forward very strongly in communications. Another piece of what I want to talk to you about is just the timeline that we're working on. Again, this is on the portal, so welcome. So we've had a period of initial organisation here, setting up the draft documents, which we'll go through today, building out the project portal and the branding, obviously our second meeting of the Technical Advisory Committee. But we're now moving really into this content development, right? So this is the real kind of sausage making part of it here, where we'll be starting to set up working groups, and I'll explain how they'll fit into it. The regional stakeholder meetings and so on. And that'll move through in the early part of next year to really drafting and synthesising the plan and the roadmap to go through to be finished by June next year. Obviously more detail to build out, but our first 6 months, a lot of content development. That's what you're going to be focusing on, reviewing a lot of material, contributing to a lot of stuff. And then we're going to be narrowing that down as we get to the first part of next year. You've seen these documents, the background to the Technical Advisory Committee, the roles of other groups. I did a little work here just to talk a bit about, to clarify this. So obviously the project management team, which is made up of the staff from A&R and VHCB, they maintain the oversight and coordinate the process, right? And we're working with them, right? So that's the function of the project management team. It is really the hub, and it's pulling everything together, and that's where the decision making, they have the primary responsibility to guide that plan as dictated by the legislature, right? So that's the project management team. and that's Becca and Annie and Trey and so on. Then the technical advisory committee here, really important part of this process. And as Trey said, it's about helping synthesize the technical and stakeholder input, and this public facing role, right? So we'll talk a bit more about that, but we see you as a really capable group to be able to talk to a lot of different audiences with a common message, right? So part of what we want to develop is what are our talking points, but then how you might say it to your stakeholder group might be slightly different to a different stakeholder group, but we're really all talking about the same stuff. We are about to start the process of setting up some working groups, and these are going to be much more sort of technical expertise based, and they're going to work on drafting actions that will be about achieving the objectives and pathways, and that material will come to us as the technical advisory committee. And our outward facing component here, we're really framing this as our regional stakeholder groups. So, we know that there are important perspectives out there and a lot of different thoughts. And we want to host a series of regional discussions where we can sort of get into regional implications. If we were to look at how that might work together in a timeline, project management team is sort of there all the time working at this. As a technical advisory committee, we obviously have, a lot of interaction, but they're key points. We see the working groups being stood up in July and working through primarily to November. And then the regional stakeholder groups, we're talking about doing sessions in July, December and June, and 4 locations per time around the state. And then in terms of, if you want to follow the bouncing ball, this is how we think it's going to work, right? So there's all this information and stuff being generated. And I think the challenge in this phase is to be really smart about how we synthesize that and how we nail that into a plan, right? I mean, I think you touched on, Trey, phase 1 was asking people, what do you think, right? And you just get a world full of ideas, right? That's not our job this round, right? This phase is actually about crafting a plan, right? So taking a lot of that input, but so if you think of the bouncing ball, right, this is and why it's kind of only a rough schematic is, I don't think we've totally got all this figured out, right? But obviously the project management team has been producing draft material, which is in front of you. You're going to weigh in on that. That's going to cascade down to be a frame of reference for working groups. We'll bounce that off the regional stakeholder groups, think about what are the regional implications by region. That feedback comes back up through the system and so on, right? So there's sort of an iterative process like that. It's not linear, right? And there's no kind of like tick a box and it moves on, but there is this sort of process where we're wanting to vet and contribute to and synthesize information as we go through, right? And sort of the big cadence of this is, the whole sort of content creation and then sort of getting that to a point where we're happy with it and then presenting that back to the regional group and then starting to craft the plan and so on, right? So that's the way we see that. And then along the bottom here, this is also going to be supported throughout this process by a really robust communication strategy. So we are looking to get a lot of this information packaged up into really interesting kind of nuggets and bites and get that out to the public, right? So while we're not asking the public for massive input, they're invited for sure to these sessions, but we're really more targeting those regional stakeholders that we've asked you to help identify. We do want to saturate the public with information about what's going on so that people are well informed, right? But it's not a public debate, if you understand the difference. We want to be educating people about what's evolving through this process as we go through, so that by the time we get to here, there's no surprises for the legislature or the public. People have seen it, they understand it, they'll have probably been part of it at some point. So that's the sort of process that we've been looking at. Any questions on that before I jump to the next piece?
May I?
Yes, please.
Sorry, thanks for your patience in my arrival. Kaya Morris, she have pronouns, and I'm supporting LAOB. So the project management team, essentially, when we're getting to the point where the tech and the working groups are getting in here, they've already developed a plan. What is that plan informed by? So if the only place that the public is coming in is in response rather in the creation, I have questions around like how that happens there, because the problem is, and especially here in Vermont, which you'll learn, is that it's not about the public being informed about what's being done to them. It's about them creating it.
Sure.
Right? So they're hearing and seeing their visions, their dreams, their concerns reflected in the plan. So that is the accountability part. It's not the information part. By the time we get to
yes. So I think you came in just after Trey talked about phase one, right? So
right.
phase one was a massive public input process, right? So that's all
So I want
leading into this.
to be clear on that though. So I know there was a public input process. I don't know if Trey, if it's informed by previous community outreach, because I can tell you as a resident of Vermont, I've heard nothing about any of these meetings. And I don't think that there's anyone in my very well educated circle as well, or regular folks that know that this
About those ones?
that the information that built this plan that everyone's responding to. So I'm just trying to get clarity on where the stakeholder engagement and not just those that are working for organizations, but those that are actual community members and ones impacted by what will happen with the conservation plan.
Do you want to cover just recap briefly the phase one, and then I'll talk about it in this context?
Welcome. Nice to see you, Kaya. I think it would be worthwhile for anybody for you, but for anybody else who doesn't feel grounded in sort of the inventory development process to go through that. But the way we gathered input in that phase was through a set of first invited interviews with people. So that was like the same project management team saying, let's create a list of 150 people, and we interviewed those. Then we developed a sort of a mailing list of people who were interested and did surveys for everybody who was interested. We did about 24 different focus groups based on sort of affinity groupings around the state to have people come together and put input, ask, what does this plan or what does this act do? What is the plan? What do we care about in conservation? And then had several different public meetings where people put in. But we knew we didn't get input from everybody in Vermont, but we also thought we created a lot of input from folks. That's what we synthesized to put together the objectives that we're starting with.
Mm-hmm.
But what we are also doing, what David is showing, is we're today, because there's so many smart people here, I feel like we could spend all day kind of rearranging things or doing that. But we actually want to get that input in July from regional stakeholders before we go back and make changes, edits, readjustments, et cetera. So we created a straw proposal based on everything we heard in that first year and a half of work, or that first 15 months of work. And that's what you have. That's the document that's here.
Yeah.
And then it's
that's a strong proposal you're saying.
Yeah, well, this was our attempt to put words on paper that we think do a really good job of synthesizing across the breadth and across the depth of what the act asks us to do. But what we're going to ask you to do today, and this is the majority of the schedule today, is to say what makes sense or doesn't make sense in this. Well, how do we? I'm previewing the beginning of that. How do we better communicate this to folks, and then who do we need to make sure are at these sessions so that as we reiterate this across the next 12 months, we continue to get that input. So it is.
I know you know me.
Yeah.
You know, and the other things. We work together. So I'm still concerned because I am part of large groups in the state that involves people of color. We're the only ones in the room. I don't know who's on the project management team, and I don't know who helped provide that with you that came from that public sector to help you create the plan, because that's the only way that you actually do proper plan management and then community engagement, right? So I'm concerned just because I have heard nothing in any of those groups from any of those folks who include Indigenous, who include refugees, who include folks who are interested in land conservation as well as land use, and who want to be able to continue to establish roots here in Vermont and be a part of that. And I'm still worried that it's going to feel we're telling folks, this is what our genius brains came up with for your best interest, rather than them even feeling like I knew who was in the room. When they made this.
So
Does that make sense? So that's a concern. I'm just saying that.
I just want to jump in, because our next agenda item actually is talking about who do we think should be at these sessions, right? So that's right on point for that, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying though, Love, is that's going to be, you may have some contention, you may have some refusal to participate, you may have some folks that will just trust the process if they don't feel like they knew who was on the project management team and that there was someone reflective of their experiences that built even this initial proposition.
So
what I'm saying?
we have an agenda item coming up that will talk about those.
I think it's hold, I think this is a good tension to put it in the room and to hold but to keep going and keep coming back to.
I know you know it.
And there are a couple, when we talk about next steps, there's a couple more ancillary next steps to talk about that I think will be helpful to this as well. Plus where we both serve on the Environmental Justice Advisory Council, where we've touched on this, but haven't dived into it. I'll go with Divin. That might be another place where we can reach those communities too, Kaya. So I have lots of thoughts and I appreciate your question.
So Annie, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I did. And I think this is a really important question and a really great point. And also with our hope of creating this technical advisory committee is that you will all also help us build trust and connect with these stakeholder groups. And hearing you that maybe these regional stakeholder listening sessions aren't a venue where certain stakeholders even feel comfortable showing up or participating. And that's important feedback. And we want to hear that too, and figure out then how do we engage those folks. So thank you for raising that point. And
And, and I think there's, thank you, Annie. And Trey, you flagged it as a point of tension. And I do think there's a couple of things that we are going to have to manage as a project management team and a technical advisory committee and working groups, right? A couple of points of tension. One is that balance of, are we getting the right voices involved? And as you sort of point to quite accurately. But the other part is we have a deadline to deliver to the legislature, right? So there's going to be points in here where we're going to all perhaps have to move a little uncomfortably fast, right? Just because that is the goalpost, right? And we want to get the process right. We think we've built in enough time. We have extended this from what was originally proposed. And we've built in this sort of cadence of these touch points and chance for people to review. But it's going to be this kind of like hasten just fast enough sort of a process, right? So we're going to have a lot of tolerance to be able to figure that out as we go through. Any other questions or comments on my super great graphic? I thought that was fantastic. Don't you love the bouncing ball?
People liked that when you said it. There was a guffaw or two.
Was there? Yeah. Or Jamie's my test, right? If Jamie even clocks onto it, then you're on a winner, but he's not paying any attention, right? Yeah, please.
And thanks so much. And I thought this was interesting, and I was kind of struck by Kaya's response. And Lamoille County, we do have some towns that are not unlike the kingdom, where let freedom ring, whatever. And one of my concerns about this document is there's some really great goals and the things that I didn't know that much about Sand Plains before, but it doesn't talk about the tools. And there should be something like pretty early in the document, like we want to do all this stuff, but we're not taking your land. And I think that is really, really important because there are people who are going to look at this and like they're coming for my back 40. So.
Okay.
So I think that the discussion around the document, the main question I'm going to be asking you is not how do we get all the mailing addresses to send this particular document to the regional stakeholders, but how do we communicate this content in a way that invites dialogue, but that also does what you said. I think clarifying that this is different than Tier 3 Act 250, clarifying that it's different than eminent domain, that it's a voluntary activity. Anyway, there's a couple of hands. I don't want to.
Yeah, please.
I was thinking too. I understand like that this is both like an iterative situation while also having this deadline.
Yeah.
And I just want to make a note for that drafting and synthesis to make sure that there is room for revision then, right? That you're building the continuous quality improvement into whatever comes out. So then as we learn from what's going on, then we're able to have already a built-in process to reevaluate and make changes.
Yeah, and I look, thank you for saying that. And I think the target on this one is this content development is that we basically are going out in December with, in this one, we'll talk about this in a second, right? But in this session, we're asking stakeholders, after going through review by yourselves and work group touching on it, asking people about implications locally. And I think that's where those concerns like, what does it mean for my land? That's where that will come up. But we also want to look for case studies or best practice of where people are doing great things at a local level. That then feeds into developing the plan, and the idea is then to have a fairly robust draft by December to go back out. And then this whole second 6 months here is really exactly to what you're saying, is that fine tuning and that synthesis and redrafting and, you know, kind of factoring in those things that may be points of concern, so that when we get to the end point here, we've got something that's been through a couple of good rounds of solid vetting.
And I want to just add to what she said, that I think that, I don't know your name.
Tasha.
sorry.
Tasha.
Tasha,
Nice to
hi,
meet you.
nice to
Yeah.
meet you. As far as, I think she was talking about the communication strategy that
Yeah.
you're describing at the bottom, as to what that looks like at the very beginning, specifically
Yeah.
to the Vermont communities.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make the distinction.
But that's a major question for today, is how to effectively communicate. And we're gonna try to communicate, the difference between July and December and the iteration of this content is we're trying to keep it at the level of sort of this draft level of objectives and pathways. And then to Tasha's question about tools and programs and everything, after we've had that round of feedback and a chance to revisit with you, we will be asking like another group of sort of working technical folks to then take that and say, if we're pretty sure we've got the objectives and pathways laid out, now we start to look at what the tools, investments, programs, et cetera. So then we can begin to map that out. And then that's what goes out the second time around. So people will see that kind of, that build, and a chance to then look at it again and say, okay, well, I didn't like this before, but now I see this, I'm okay with it. Or this looks even harder to me, given how you've like frameworked it out.
Can I reflect back what I'm hearing?
Please, yeah.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that there is this established process that then is going to that has informed this draft, and that everybody's going to be giving input to this draft and developing who's going to be a part of those stakeholder groups. At the same time, there's going to be like an initial communication strategy that's going to be informing community about what this is going to be looking like, what's happening with this process, et cetera. And that then after getting all of that feedback in July, there's going to be revisions, and that after that second wave of feedback, then we're going to be addressing programs and what that's
And the
going-
second wave of regional stakeholder feedback, yeah.
The second wave, meaning December, after
Yeah.
December.
Yeah.
We're going to be addressing programs and how that's going to be looking like directly for community members.
Yes.
And then communicating that,
I'm not sure what looking for community members.
meaning that's going to be looking like, that, another word of it would, another way to say it would be, how that's going to be impacting the community, what that's going to be looking like as far as programs to the community.
Yes, I.
Okay. After the second part here in December.
Mhm.
Okay,
And,
thank you.
and we will keep revisiting and kind of building this out as we go. I do think there's a couple of comments that have been made that I show I'm the outsider a little bit in this, right? But I do think that there's something we have to think about when we think about the communication tray, because you've mentioned that. I don't think it's just about the message, right, as the technical message. I mean, I look at this and I go, this is incredibly exciting. I mean, this is an opportunity for a state to craft a vision that the legislators laid down a challenge for, to think about how you develop long-term conservation strategy, which resonates so strongly with the Vermont culture, right? And I know that will kind of flare up for people concerns and pockets like that, right? But I do think as a technical advisory committee, part of the responsibility is to be the advocates for the vision of this and the ultimate outcome. And, you know, invite people to come in to kind of talk about things, but we're looking for solutions, right? Ultimately, we're looking at the end to have a plan that fulfills that requirement or the obligation or the vision that the legislator set, but does it in a way that people see it as a net positive to the community, right? And, you know, we've all seen enough of these things to know these can go a couple of different ways, right? It can be a really exciting conversation that's for sure challenging, right? But we're really working together and figuring it out and kind of nutting out solutions, right? Or it can just turn into a bit of a, you know, a swirling mess, right? and I think what's going to keep it on track is going to be some really powerful advocacy for that. This is a really important process, right? I mean, there's been an enormous amount of work that's led up to this, not just phase one, but all the other entities that you talked about. There's a lot of threads that lead to this formation of a plan that is really around how do we take a big chunk of this state and conserve it in perpetuity for people and so on. So I think that when we get into the communication strategy and we start to interview you, we're going to be looking for how can you communicate this in a way that is like a good news story for people? This is something to be proud of and something to weigh in on. Sure, we might have different views and we'll hammer those out on the way. That's what grown-ups do, right? But we're going to get to a point where we develop something that we can all stand by. That's ultimately, I think, the soft subtext of what this process is trying to do is to figure out what are the pathways, what's possible, where are the points of tension, figure that out, come back, develop a plan, lay out like what's that roadmap actually look like, what percent of what lands where, how do we do that? But we do that with a spirit of really getting to a point here of celebration where we've accomplished something remarkable. That's my 2 cents worth as somebody who's clearly doesn't live in Vermont, right?
Maybe kind of before
No,
we,
go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing to that because, and I hope this is helpful rather than just repetitive from earlier, but the way that like the objective 1, objective 2, objective 3 that we've laid out, sort of like, they're not just a different sets of like kind of pathways that are similar. They're actually really different types of objectives. Objective 1, we're going to, A&R is going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but it sets out a set of sort of ecological criteria that we want to guide our efforts with as we are thinking about the investments in the next 25 years. But then in objective 3 is thinking about that capacity and programming and support and innovation. In the middle, though, and what I think makes the Venn diagram really work is the second objective that it sort of reads in the other processes that are ongoing. And it asks the question, what's the role of conservation in these processes, including agriculture, including silviculture, including recreation, including sort of ecological integrity, and including land access. And so I think one of the things that we're hoping we'll tease out of this in the ongoing implementation is ongoing communications about the role of conservation in those other initiatives and uplifting them. And they're sort of named. LAOB's work is something we want to name and uplift under land access and equity, and say, how does permanent conservation or long-term conservation fit into the work that you're doing? Are people accessing it? How do we continue to do that? And we'll probably be participating in those parallel processes, right? There is a food security roadmap, there's a forest future roadmap, there's a SCORP plan for recreation, and there's an ongoing land access project at LAOB. We've talked to Senator for Local Communities too about how do we create another timeline where we can continue to do this work. So wanted to add that in as sort of a way to say we're going to keep surrounding this with outreach and implementation. And so hopefully whatever sector you come to here from today, you'll be thinking not only about that, but like, how does that then intertwine with all these other kind of focal points or entry points to conservation? Yeah. And what are the shared values and needs and what are the distinct values and needs?
Good intro. Any other questions of that kind of bouncing ball process before we go on to, because I think we should turn our minds to the core part of today, which is to kind of work our way through these objectives and pathways.
Yeah, and actually, I'm so glad you mentioned a Venn diagram and brought it up.
Oh, look what we have.
We have one, right? And I guess I want to just, and just coming from kind of a different background, that all of this is still being discussed in the context of conservation, but I think we know, like so many times in Vermont, initiatives succeed when they're also tied to other goals and successes. And we have certainly cases in rural areas where, a small town wants to develop a water source and works with a conservation entity to conserve some land where the well is based, or a small town is building wastewater system and actually develops a town forest in order to get an easement. So I just think that we should also emphasize these conservation goals, contributing and supporting our communities and their development goals. And because I just feel like you'll connect with so many more people, things are tied together.
Really good point. And we've actually, that's part of it. We'll come back to the regional stakeholder sessions, but we've already started, and actually Trey and Annie and her team have started to work on little kind of case studies, like little venues, exactly what you're talking about, that scale where somebody could take the kind of lofty ambitions here and go, well, what does that mean for me? Oh, that's my town forest, or that's my, it's our recreation area or something like that. So we're trying to, I think, develop those sort of storylines that we can connect it from you know, that very local level to people who want to understand these big kind of sweeping objectives. So we do want to spend a bit of time on this, right? And we'll come back and talk about the regional sessions before lunch, right? But Trey did a pretty good introduction on this, right? So was there anything else you wanted to add in terms of introducing this framework? And then I want to give a chance for Annie and Trey and Becca to walk us through each one of these objectives and just talk about it, what's in the document, where it came from, how we see that working. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
Before Becca jumps in, I think what we'd like to know is what do you like and what doesn't make sense?
Yeah.
So we're not looking for like a, you know, touch or rubber stamp today. We are talking also about what's the communications goals for this. But like, what do you like and what doesn't make sense is a question that you're going to want to answer and we want you to answer. Number two, did we capture the breadth? Like there was a lot that went into the inventory, and we didn't think every idea had to come forward and manifest itself in this plan, but we wanted to capture the breadth of interest at least and the stakeholders who the act came. So does this get at that in a way that's actionable? And then does it lead to action? As you look at this, can you imagine the programs and tools and investments that we're going to go forward with under these objectives and pathways? And then finally, how do we, back to the question that we've been addressing, which is how do we create pull here? How do we pull Vermonters towards this? We want people to see themselves as able to participate in a strategy that invests public and private money, as well as effort, labor, community focus into these long-term and permanent solutions for land protection. That's the feedback that I think, as we talk for a few more minutes about what's in this, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at it, so we won't talk too long, but those are the kind of questions to keep in mind. But I think we're going to ask Becca to kick us off.
Yeah, so let's do that, right? So I'm going to leave this up. So you're going to take us away on this one, right? And we've got Bob here, obviously, to help out too. So,
You want me to move over?
oh yeah, you swing around, yeah.
And if you're following along in the document, this is pages 4 and 5. That's Becca's going to be speaking to. But it was centering Vermont conservation design.
And so these briefings are designed primarily to orientate you to what's in here, how it got here, right? And sort of you can cogitate on your thoughts. You know, we're not going to kind of necessarily wordsmith this today, right? But we want to just really give you a chance to understand the process that led to its formation. And then we'll take kind of sort of reactions once we get through all three of the objectives. So Becca, please.
Thanks, David. So for those of you that joined after introductions, I'm Becca Washburn. I work for the Forest Parks and Recreation Department in the Agency of Natural Resources. I joined the project team after Gannon Osborne shifted over to the Nature Conservancy. So I have notes today because it's been a pretty quick learning curve to try and get up to speed here. But I'm building on work that was done starting in October of 2024. So just this past fall. As David alluded to, Bob Zano led a group of technical experts from inside and outside the organization, including Bob Zano, Jens Hilke, Jared Nunnery, Gus Goodwin, Shelby Perry, Peter Van Loon, and Chris Moore to really dive into this ecological objective, which is intended to help us think about and understand what it means to maintain, protect, and enhance an ecologically functional landscape with the level of integrity that acknowledges that people live here and need, as Tasha described, need to be able to function effectively. So with that, and as a side note, one of the things that we expect to be offering potentially later this month is a deeper dive into the work of this working group. We're hoping to convene the technical advisory committee to actually be part of a presentation where Bob would give more detail into this. The research is fascinating, the data is incredible. But for my purposes today, what I want to try and do is just give us sort of the introduction to what this objective is intended to accomplish and how it's expected to be able to overlap with the other objectives you'll be hearing about this morning. I think one of the easiest ways to consider this for me was really looking at this boiled down to its most essential elements. The objective itself is about centering Vermont conservation design, which really outlines a vision for what it looks like to achieve ecological function and connectivity in our state. And when you look at how to do that, this working group really felt like there were a couple of basic elements. Representation, essentially what does it look like across the biophysical regions represented in Vermont to make sure that permanent conservation is being done deliberately in the right places to achieve the right outcomes. It's about quality, not necessarily quantity. Connectivity was another one. I think the land conservation community has been really good at looking at large blocks of forest as being something worthy of protection. And when this working group dug into the details, examined the data, explored what permanent conservation has looked like over the last several decades, there were a couple of places around the state where what's being termed stepping stones emerged as potentially really good conservation opportunities to enhance connectivity, where on their own, other than where they're situated on the landscape, might not emerge as high priorities. Forest structure, another basic element of what it means to achieve ecological function and connectivity, came up. There are 3 different types of land protection that are described in the legislation: ecological reserve area, biodiversity conservation area, natural resource management area. The thought in this pathway is really looking at how do we achieve the goals outlined in VCD that say we need more young forest and we need more old forest. This forest structure diversity is really important when you think about ecological function. And based on historic land use, we don't have a lot of either of those. And we need to figure out how to do more with that. So there's a thought that old forest in particular, we need to be focusing in other biophysical regions where we haven't been doing as much of that work. And for the biodiversity conservation definition and the natural resource management definition, when we're doing land protection in those spaces, diversity in forest structure is going to be really important. So that's kind of high level what that pathway was thinking and considering in its development. Another one that I think is really important for us to consider is more finer scale land conservation, rare and significant ecological features in the form of an RTE species, a small natural community, RTE species being rare, threatened, and endangered species.
Becca, just as you go through,
Yeah.
you're following the pathways, aren't you? So
yes,
if you can just call out which pathway you're on, so then people can track a little bit on the document, right?
I would be happy.
So you were just starting to talk on, because we numbered these, right? So
yes,
you're up to 1E, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. It's just like me not to follow the document. Sorry about that,
That's
David.
okay, no.
Going off the reservation already. So representation is pathway 1A, ecological representation. Pathway 1B, connectivity corridors. Forest structure, pathway 1C.
Yep.
Rare and significant ecological features, pathway 1E. So not only did I not follow the script, I skipped around. Aquatic systems is pathway 1D, and in this case, it's really looking at the recognition that ecological integrity and its effectiveness really needs to be tied to the condition of riparian areas and the aquatic systems that depend upon them. Having access to floodplains, being able to allow rivers to meander, unimpeded movement of aquatic organisms, hanging culverts always comes to mind for me, and then really looking at the need for natural riparian vegetation in those riparian areas is what this pathway in particular is intended to be focused on. So again, circling back to how this objective was developed, work group really taking VCD and the components of VCD, looking at it from the landscape scale right down to the finest scale of particular species that need more deliberate land protection. These different pathways are expected to be sort of the infrastructure that allows working groups and those regional stakeholder groups to think about and identify actions either at the regional level or statewide that will allow us to take action in this space.
Great.
Thanks,
Should we
David.
take the questions for each of them?
Yeah, I think so, right? And this one's a really interesting one too, because I mean, there seems to be a lot of hard science and a lot of sort of work's been gone into this in terms of, really identify. I mean, as we get into other phases, I mean, starting to think about what percent of areas and how big they are and all those type of things, that'll get really interesting, right? But this objective is a little different to the other two because they've got quite different elements. They're all about people and about how do we activate or resource the sort of conservation plan. This one, so you have to sort of turn on your ecological head, right? And there's a real nice kind of hard science to it. So it's kind of enjoyable to hear, right? So, but let's take comments or questions or reactions to this before we go to the next. Yeah, please.
And for what it's worth, Bob is here and able to answer the technical questions. I didn't have the benefit of participating in this work group, so I'm just a spokesperson for it.
You want to just introduce yourself, Bob?
Say again.
Yeah, sitting under the poster that's perfectly framed above your head there, right? Did you do that deliberately? Is that your chair? In fact, we've been talking about maybe the virtual TAC we were talking about doing at the end of the month, that you might just do a whole presentation on this Vermont conservation design, because it's a really, foundational element. So just a heads up on that. So
yeah, great. And hi, everybody. Keith Moore. Apologies for being a little late. The Vermont Woodland Association. My question, actually, thank you, Becca, for this overview. And some of the things that you mentioned, I guess I'm finding myself a little confused and looking for some regrounding in terms of the phase one. And I apologize if this was covered earlier, but so now we're looking at kind of these three different objectives. And I'm thinking about this as layers. And I know during phase one, there were kind of three different, I don't know what we're calling them, but you mentioned I think it was ecological reserve, natural resource management. I guess my head is sort of swirling right now in terms of how do those plug into these three objectives? And at some point, are we going to have a conversation? I know this is probably above and beyond the conversation around just objective one, but I'm just wondering, are we going to have a conversation about that, or can somebody help connect those dots in terms of how that's showing up here in this objective?
Yeah.
And I'm confused as to sort of how that plugs into this larger plan.
Did you came in a little late, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah. So
if that's covered, I'll catch up later.
But here's a note, Trey. I think it's really interesting that everybody who missed your introduction has the same question, right? And I think that's probably going to be quite widespread. So we really need to think about how we communicate that right at the front end. Okay, here's phase one. Here's how we got to where we are now, right? I think everyone's really interested in that. What's that set of lines look like?
I think that. Comment. I wrote that down earlier, just thinking that through line of all the work that we've done prior to this, and who and how they were engaged throughout that process in terms of, and also I think even articulating how much was cast by the legislation itself.
Yeah.
So we're not here to redetermine the why and what were big picture goals. I think that feels super important from a public engagement standpoint. And I guess the other question, just generally before we jump in on all the specific pathways, is thinking, I guess in my mind, as I read through this, I did have some questions almost about definitions and thinking about, I think we understand what an objective is in terms of how these layer underneath the big goals and objectives. The pathways feel very much, and this may be completely wrong, but the paragraph that sits above the sort of how.
Yeah.
And the goal for our next 12 months or whatever is to really work with the public and everyone on the how.
Yeah.
And so and I think if we cast that as we communicate, we're spending this time doing the dolphin, the purposing or whatever, and working back and forth to build out that how with you in a way that's informed by the public. That's where I feel that's important, because I look at the pathways and I'm these are a bit of the how, but it's not anything specific enough to know what this would actually look like at all.
Yeah. And as you think about it, if you don't think it even leads to specifics, that's a good comment. If you're going to say, I know you want to get to specifics, team, but the way this is written doesn't look actionable, or this looks supremely actionable. Here's a good example of one that I can imagine translating into a set of actions, investments, metrics, stakeholders.
Well, and actually, again, I think that's a really important point, because we're going to have to keep coming back to 30 by 30, right? It's 30% of the land by 2030, and the pathways have to lay out what that actually looks like. Because it has to be a cumulative result that gets us to 30% in conservation.
Questions back here.
Oh yeah.
Question.
I can go real quick, which is, I think some of the gap that some of us are feeling is that phase one ended in a highly unresolved state. So it was not as though there was debate and then there was consensus built. There was just a lot of open debate that then landed in a bunch of different letters that went with the report that said, well, this person who's speaking on behalf of Indigenous people thinks is highly questioning 30 by 30 as a value. And I personally am questioning 30 by 30. I continue to sit in this room and wonder if I am still questioning 30 by 30 as a value, do I belong in this advisory committee or do I not? Like, is that a precursor to being here? And so that I think is some of the, I don't know how much that tension was relayed to you, but obviously Trey, you sat right in the middle of it. And I think what I hear you saying in your presentation is this is your and the working, sorry, the, I can't remember what they call it. The
Project management.
project management team's attempt to synthesize many different perspectives into this plan. But the problem is all those different perspectives did not get a chance to synthesize together. And so that is like reinforcing the same kind of decision-making, ownership, power structure that is like, that defines the conservation community. And so in terms of like, who owns these actions, who does not have access to them, like, I'm interested in these ecological pathways. I'm interested in the hard science. But as came up in our last meeting on the Zoom, I asked what happens when there is direct conflict between these? And I heard two answers. I heard one person say, we're gonna focus on things in the Venn diagram that speak to 1, 2, and 3 together. And then I heard somebody else say, no, what's in the middle is a sampling of 1, 2, and 3. So there's not really a Venn component, it's 3 buckets. But like saying it's a Venn suggests that we're gonna pursue actions that speak to all 3 principles at once. That's a Venn. 3 buckets is a different thing, which is fine, but like putting it into a Venn does a little bit of the like, gaslighting that I continue to feel in this meeting, which is, well, we all agree. All these things fit together, but actually this is highly contentious material because it is talking about control over land and who controls the land and who controls the conversation. Right. I think a lot of us are still in the phase 1 moment of like, wait, did our point even get heard? And I'm not seeing in this synthesis that there is actually an understanding of the fundamental power structures over who are conservationists, who are the conservation community, whose voices matter, who owns land, like those questions I do not feel.
If I may, I think I have if I may, I appreciate what you were saying here. And I think so. Again, I'm not here to be contrarian. I'm here to get excellence. I want excellence out of this plan. We have to do this right because, as you know, as folks who have been touching this on every other subcommittee and every other state-created entity that's been trying to address this as a whole, this previous work has not been successful. Indigenous community have gotten up and left the room. People of color have said, I will not work with y'all anymore. The folks that are low income are like, none of this reflects my life. Folks in the disability community are like, you're not even thinking about how this will address anything that's happening for me, right? So I appreciate, I know you're new as well. So I may have come late to the meeting, but I think you're a little new to what's happening here. So I want to help support bringing in those voices. What I think is going to be necessary as we do these objectives, address it head on. You need to think about the most contrarian person who's going to come and build all of the worst press, who's going to slam and destroy this project, and you need to sell it to them. So what were their concerns, and did we name them in explicit language? Did we say there are folks that feel the way we are treating our watersheds is working against traditional ecological knowledge from the Indigenous community? This is how we're addressing it. It's saying we heard you, we see you, we're not shying from it because we got work to do. So we need y'all to come with us. Does that make sense? So I think, I agree. I think these are beautiful objectives. But people don't know how it ties back to the 20 times they came to a town meeting, the 2 people who showed up to something that was publicly warned, or even the person who wrote a letter or called in, kids who may have even had thoughts. So while there are many Vermonters who don't have a specific, explicit technical knowledge on this, they've been looking at that green field. They've been looking at, those brown fields. They've been looking at all of these things that we're trying to address. They're looking at the overdevelopment of areas. They've seen all of this and they know in their gut what actually are some solutions, and they come with those. They just continually don't get reflected. So there was a practice when I was the equity consultant for the Climate Action Council that we asked for not a minority report, but almost like an opposing opinion. so that those who did not agree with what we were going to put out here, because we're trying to be anti-imperialist around this. Conservationism, as it's been done in the United States, has been a very much imperialistic project. So we're trying to move away from that, right? So we're saying we heard you, we're not ignoring it, we're naming it here so that we can all have a real conversation about it as we move forward with this work, right? So like that's I think that's all that's needed on some levels besides getting people to make sure they're in the room, so that this can be treated as it deserves. Those hopes and dreams that you were naming, the positivity and the beauty of it will be marred if that person from Milton is like, absolutely not, live free or die. Or that elderly person is like, but in order for you to do that, you're going to move my mobile home and that was my retirement spot.
Yeah. All right.
Right? That's what we're saying. Do you know what I'm saying? So these are the types of things people are going to come with. They don't have the articulation here. They have the direct experience that may not feel like it's related, but it is. So that has to be named in explicit. This is where the community has to trust us again. And they don't. They don't at all. So that's where I'm coming from. So I know it feels harsh, but
so
great.
Strong comments, great, and really appreciate it, right? You're now tasked with working with me, right, to identify, and I think that's what we can do in the, you know, like we talked about it at the level of, you talked about it at the local community forest level. I think we have to find all these ways to create as many connections to people as we can so they can see themselves in this plan, right? I mean, this is a plan for the people of this state. But we are playing this plan. You know, the question about am I even in the right room? I would say, well, if you think about sport, you know, we're playing soccer, right? If you want to play tennis, that's a different game, right? But the mandate here, which has been given by the legislature, which cascades down, is to develop a plan in the framework of the legislation that delivers the 30 by 30, right? And now,
And you can't make recommendations that say 30 by 30 is not our recommendation. You do have the ability to do that. You do. That is what you are also tasked with doing, is sometimes challenging those assumptions.
Yes.
There is room to say, all right, this is what we got, but
and we have the opportunity to explore different pathways, right? So, but I do want to keep us on track here, right? Because these are really important conversations, right? But let's take some of that and as we develop up some of the material, let's work directly on saying, okay, what are some of those groups or voices we need to connect with? And how do we find examples or how do we frame it so that people see that, right? And it's also going to apply to somebody who works in the forest products economy, and yeah, they're going to have a set of concerns which may be quite different. But there's all these people whose lives touch on the landscape, and so we're going to have to figure out as we develop communication around this ways to portray how this plan serves people and addresses their concerns, right? So we understand the communication's a really big deal on this, right? But I do want to just keep putting it as there are a whole bunch of voices that we need to address, right? You pointed to some really important ones, right? There's a whole bunch of other really important ones too, and we want to make sure we're hitting them all, right? So Trady, do you want to say something?
So I was going to say, I think as we jump into the next section, Annie's going to talk again about some of the other communities of interested folks. I also wanted to point out that I think we've done a lot in the inventory analysis. There's a lot written already about, like, we documented a lot of what you just said. We need to make sure so if we're looking for a record where we can say, hey, here were people whose viewpoints didn't, you know, like we've got a record of how to do that. And then we also have a goal, which is to describe what we're doing is not attempting to, like, this second objective isn't saying it's going to solve all things working lands or all things equitable access. It's going to offer solutions through permanent conservation to advance those programs. So that is with great respect to all the stakeholders who wanted to make sure that they were part of this. We said we want to bring this plan to a theater near you to talk about how permanent conservation fits into what you're doing and how it uplifts that work. But it won't solve the history of land use and private property ownership in sort of the Western world from Rome till now. It won't solve the tensions between aquatic health and agricultural land use, or between good skidder bridges and skidder bridges that, you know, leave streams. You know, it's not attempting to be all things to all the problems. It's attempting to offer solutions through conservation within these other kind of swim lanes and workflows, but maybe
so and I think as we go around we'll hear more of that come in, right? So so Becca and if you guys can switch it out, right? So just so we can get to the microphone. And I've got 2 3s up there, I'm sorry. So we're doing strengthen conservation capacity, aren't we?
Do the three share that.
Yeah, I've got 2 3s.
Grow conservation and communities.
Okay, good. You're doing that one.
I'm
Okay.
doing number 2.
That's 2, right?
Yes. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Annie Becker. For those who didn't get to hear the initial intro, I work with VHCB. I'm the Associate Director of Resource Development and Resilience. But I'm also kind of helping take a project management role for this phase of the Act 59 work. So,
Project manager.
yeah.
Annie's in charge of all of us.
So listen up. No, I'm just kidding.
As she should be.
Yes.
So I also was not involved in the phase 1 work. I joined VHCB in July of last year. But I've read through the inventory analysis. I've been able to chat with members of our team. And in developing these objectives, both 2 and 3, but objective 2, which I will be talking about, as Trey has described, we took a lot of time to go through that inventory analysis and try to, pick out what are the messages that we were hearing a lot. And when we talk about this project management team that put together this draft that we're reviewing today, I heard that question come up. I just want to clarify. So that project management team is comprised of VHCB and A&R staff. So Trey and I, Gannon in his role at A&R, many other folks at both of our groups too. So a lot of staff, and then also VHCB and A&R leadership had a hand in reviewing what we drafted here. So understanding where we are today, that now we want to hear input from the Technical Advisory Committee working groups and regional stakeholders. There was a lot of intention put into this draft and a lot of work put into this draft, but that's the group that put this plan together to kind of address that question. But digging into objective 2, so this objective titled Growing Conservation in Communities. So this really sits at that intersection of land protection and community well-being. So this objective is about ensuring that the benefits of conservation, whether ecological, economic, recreational, or educational, are felt more broadly and equitably across the Vermont communities. So it expands our focus beyond just protecting land for ecological function and moves towards integrating conservation with lives, livelihoods, and resilience of the people who live here. We want these pathways and associated actions, so the actions that we'll build out under these pathways through these next sessions, to help connect people with the communities they live in and to the land. So we see this objective as delivering a key goal of the Act, the Community Resilience and Biodiversity Protection Act, or Act 59, as we call it, to connect land conservation with climate adaptation, equitable access, working lands, and local stewardship. So we have 5 pathways under this objective that I'll walk through and just highlight briefly. So pathway 2A, working lands. So this is to promote the resilience, ecological function, and productivity of Vermont's working farms and forests. So this pathway focuses on protecting and enhancing Vermont's working forests and agricultural lands as essential components of the state's conservation future. So it aims to ensure these lands are permanently conserved and to support more ecologically beneficial land management practices. To do this, it will align with and build upon existing efforts like the Forest Future and Food Resilience Roadmaps, and identify strategies and investments that improve the viability and sustainability of these working lands across Vermont. Pathway 2 is related to outdoor recreation. This pathway focuses on improving access to a wide range of outdoor recreational opportunities while ensuring the protection and long-term stewardship of conserved lands. This pathway will align with the Move Forward Vermont plan, kind of as a blueprint, and it will identify the investments and conservation actions needed to improve recreational access in ways that also safeguard ecological values and support the sustainable use of Vermont's natural areas. Pathway 2C is related to equitable access. So this pathway aims to advance equitable access to conserved lands, land-based enterprises, and outdoor recreation, recognizing that access to conservation benefits varies across demographic, socioeconomic, and geographic lines. In response to Act 59, it will identify investments and programmatic strategies to ensure that all Vermonters, especially historically underserved communities, can meaningfully benefit from and engage with conserved lands and the state's land-based economy. Pathway 2D is related to climate resilience. So this pathway will focus on advancing land conservation and nature-based climate solutions to help Vermont adapt to increasing climate-related impacts like flooding, drought, and forest disturbances. In coordination with Vermont's Climate Action Plan and the Resilience Implementation Strategy, it will identify actions and investments that build community and ecological resilience while delivering multiple co-benefits such as habitat connectivity, water quality improvements, and protection of critical natural resources. And then the final pathway under this objective is related to place-based education and outreach. So this pathway focuses on leveraging conserved lands as platforms for education and outreach to deepen Vermonters' connection to the natural world and strengthen support for conservation. So it will identify actions that ensure conserved lands continue to serve as classrooms and community learning spaces, helping people from all ages form meaningful relationships with nature. At the same time, it should support efforts to help communities, landowners, and land managers understand why, how, and where to conserve land, fostering informed participation in Vermont's conservation future. That's objective 2. There's a lot there, just like in all of our objectives.
So comments, reactions? So Nick?
I mean, this is like sort of semantics and title, but thinking about this as how this objective feels very much like the one that's most grounded and working with communities and people in the plan. And so I just wonder, honestly, like, to me, sometimes the term like grow conservation in communities could be construed as like, we're going to go conserve land in your community. Like if it's something like grow conservation in and with, or grow community-centered, I don't know what the right term is, but to express the fact that like this is one in which community input and participation and direction in many cases is going to be really important. Whereas like Vermont, then VCD is like, that's a very technical, and it can be somewhat top-down driven in terms of where we need to go to protect species and habitat, and capacity similarly is very much about resources and some involvement too, but just something to think about in terms of just how we engage folks. Is like, we want you involved in the direction setting and participation here. It's not like coming to a community near you, like how we're going to conserve land for you.
Grow communities around conservation.
Really, is what you're talking about. Growing engagement is really what you're driving at, right? It's not conservation, engagement with conservation.
Yeah, how conservation comes to communities.
And participation and outcomes and community ownership.
Yes. So
I don't know which one.
You go ahead.
Your hand went up just a minute before. Yeah.
I have a special desire as out of this section that I just want to name. And it doesn't have to be addressed, but I would love it if at some point, since we are all in so many meetings together, is something that at some point we can pick up together. Is the notion that how do we teach people to live in land with nature? Is there, because the constructs and the context of conservation and the ways I imagine it separates people from land.
Yeah.
And I know for many reasons, and I know that land needs our advocacy and nature needs our advocacy too. And I'm with us on that, right? As far as we want to protect nature and the environment. And is there a way for there to be plans or ways that the conservation community gets behind people living within land?
Yeah.
And if there's technologies as we're kind of moving into the future that are being developed, that we can consent and agree that these are good ways for people to live in and with land. It's like a dream. It's like a kit or a toolkit or a homes for all thing for conservation and people living with land.
Thank you. Other comments? Reactions?
I just love Arnella's dreams. I'm here for them. Yeah, I mean, maybe picking up on what was being said over here a little bit, I just think it's really easy for conservation organizations to fall into the trap of doing what we call community conservation as a way of creating buy-in for our missions.
Correct.
And it's really important, I think, that we flip that. And we should be thinking about how is conservation serving people and how are they in the driver's seat of the projects that matter the most to them, and how are we adapting and innovating and changing to do those projects better and in an authentic partnership. So that's really what I want to see coming out of this particular plan.
I appreciate that point, and I'll just chime in, like, just sitting here thinking about that and appreciate that comment. And, I come from a perspective of really trying to support and uplift, forest management, right? Forest stewardship. And I think as a state right now and as a kind of broader Vermont community, if I will, I think that, kind of that spectrum of stewardship is, sort of, there's been a lot of debate, a lot of conversation about, sort of what is conservation? And it's funny, like, I've just been sitting with this and just kind of thinking about, I actually I wanted to, I didn't have time, but I sat down, I was like wondering how many times does the word working lands kind of get identified in here? And while I love that, I also think about like working lands and under the context of conservation is really different for a conservation organization versus the context of working lands for a private landowner, right? And so one of the things is, as you were, we're working through and the different pathways, I was thinking to myself, like, even the working lands objective in here talks about ecological benefits. And I can tell you from a perspective of private landowners, economics is a really important, for good or bad, right? For better or worse, economics is a really big contributor to why people are able to maintain, their forest land, right? And so thinking about, I love this conversation about like, how do we approach this from a perspective of one, kind of engaging, in that conversation. It's hard, it's sticky, it's messy, and there is contention. But I think if we don't start that conversation through this process, then we're missing an opportunity, I think, to really help move the needle in a productive and positive direction. And then two, just thinking about like, how do we break down some of these barriers? And again, like, I don't have the solutions. I love it when people come to these conversations with solutions. I don't have those yet, right? And I hope, like, as a group, like, I love the fact that we're talking about this and acknowledging this, because I think as a group, we can hopefully come up with some solutions to this. But if we don't address this, if we don't acknowledge it, I think we're really missing an opportunity and potentially a danger of contributing to some of that divisiveness that exists right now.
So can I ask, just let me ask this question then. So taking those comments into account, right? We've put all that together, and as you were saying that, I was re-looking at the language in these pathways. Is it a matter of, are we missing a pathway? Do we need to think about reframing pathways, or is it the context that sits over the top of this whole objective?
David, I know there's some hands, so I want to hear from other folks. Yeah. But I'll tell you right now, I'm sitting here looking at the picture of horse logging under working lands, and that to me screams right away, that's not where, I actually came to Vermont to work as a horse logger, so don't get me wrong, I love horse logging. That's why I ended up in Vermont. However, when I think of working lands, like, that concerns me, that's the image that, that's being portrayed. And that's a really simple
Okay,
response,
so thank you. So Jamie and then Nick, I think.
Yeah, no, appreciate the question, because what I've been thinking about, and I appreciate all this conversation, I think is really informative, is I think there is a need for more context up front before we get into the pathways. Where do we come from? And the context is both hitting on some of these themes or tension points that we've been talking about. I think what I really want to agree with Tasha said before is there's a bit of we need to embrace that a lot of this is about it's not imposing conservation, it's trying to support opportunities for landowners, willing landowners who are interested in this, communities who are interested in it, meeting the goals for communities. Appreciate next point too, like grow conservation maybe for communities versus in communities, like the terminology matters, but up front I think we need to set some of the context of what this work is about and what it's not about, and how it can integrate with, as we've already talked about, other initiatives that are happening right now in the state that are also focused on trying to get to these balance points, right? Like, how do we meet housing demands? How do we make sure our conservation is not working against some of those goals? And then one other thought in the beginning, I think we're missing some of the setting the framework. So if you're reading this as a standalone document and just going back to the previous pathways, you may not understand that some of these terms are actually in Act 59, and they're like tracking terms for different categories of land conservation, but you wouldn't know that. And so I think we do need to set up a bit of the framework of what Act 59 is before we get into the pathways too.
I come back to the word conservation actually, and I think like I want to frame this in that conservation is not actually our goal. Like we use this term all the time, like conservation, like the tool of the conservation, permanent protection through conservation, like this is not the goal. The goal is a community and a state, human, non-human land together thriving. And I feel like we need to go back to like that is our goal.
Well, and even to
Conservation
Jamie's
is
point,
one rough tool.
diving into the nomenclature of the act introduces that, but calls it a vision, what you just said. The vision is a functioning and protected landscape that's available to people, that supports and uplifts and makes viable enterprises. And then it also defines the term conserved and says we want to see conserved by 2030 and 2050. So it interplays these things in a way that I hope, and to a different point earlier, that we start to like, let's move away from the either ors of these and start to embrace like rejecting those binaries and saying it's both of these things. It's both, you know, there are places of tension that we want to just uphold and keep there, but we don't need to solve them or defeat them. You know what I mean? That's sort of how, that's what we're trying to do with this one. The good news is on context is that we didn't send you the longer document, but we're working on a lot of contextual materials that are part of this. And so that's good to know that should really, as we think also about how to present this in like a, you know, visual format to people in a meeting. If we have a stakeholder meeting for a couple of hours, we'll probably talk to them for a little bit at the beginning before we circulate and do World Cup based stuff. So instead of putting these things up here without context, is really developing a slide deck that moves through that context, as well as some materials that go out with the invites that have like, here's a sheet of definitions. Here's a summary of what we pulled from the inventory and how, and you know, so some of those things I think that's really good and actionable feedback. And then this question of seeing people into this is what we want. That's what objective 2 is all about, is to say we do have these ecological goals around the term conserved, and we want to advance that through these kind of community-based ideas. We want to do that in new and innovative ways that bring people, you know. So getting back to that end result that you started with, Emily, which I love.
Yeah, and also like where is conservation going to serve us really well, and where is it not going to serve our?
Sorry, that's
what alternatives are we?
To Kate's point, a landowner might say, "Hey, I'm really interested in managing my forest land. There's a set of outcomes I'd like to achieve: timber production, you know, ecological health for certain kind of species, and I want some trails that I can walk around on." And conservation may be a tool that helps them to do that by.
That's where I want to get, right?
Yes.
Because I feel like sometimes
But
we
it
say
might not.
it's this versus
Or current use might be a
Right,
tool, or hiring a forester to just do your own forestry plan outside of any of those things might be the best thing for that landowner, but helping people understand where does conservation fit in, little c, legal permanent conservation versus some of these other tools.
I think that's the middle of the Venn diagram is let's make sure we're
That's
supporting
what I hope.
that, right? Like,
Yeah.
so how do we get to that respects and honors, you know, that kind of broad, because I think, yeah, I mean, that's the holy grail, right? And yeah.
That's like a really helpful reframe for me on the Venn diagram. And I think what I trip on is oftentimes when the conversation gets challenging, we like revert back to this, but that's what the legislation says. The legislation says 50 by 50. We all agree that's what we're going for. And I think through phase 1, we found we do not all agree. Like that, the state of Vermont does not agree. And one act that was passed by a supermajority legislature in 1 year, like I don't know how long Act 59 was in the works, but it was not like a highly publicized piece of legislation, and it was passed in a supermajority. I don't know if the governor signed it or not, but it's that okay, didn't. We have a very different legislative structure this year. There are how many, like hundreds of acts that are passed every year. We do not necessarily convene this many of our state resources behind every law that is passed. There is a different power at work behind this act, and we can be more than what essentially one committee put through and kind of jammed through. I love the idea of working on a Venn diagram that says, what are our real conservation goals as a community, and how does little c easement fit into that. I do not feel comfortable being driven by a Venn diagram that says we all agree 50% of our land should be state managed, state owned, or nonprofit managed and owned under easements that are run and managed by a handful of all white elite organizations. Personally, professionally, I'm not comfortable with that goal. I'm very interested in a goal that says, yes, many of us are technical experts in ecology, and you don't have to be an ecologist who got a master's degree in ecology to be a technical expert. So I'm so sorry for my tone. I have had a terrible week, and this subject is hard for me. So deep breath. I do want to be with you all. I am an environmentalist, which I think is what makes this so hard for me, is that I want to be here at this table with you, but I feel alienated by what feels like elitist assumptions about what is the right way forward. And I'll just say as my final point on that, it would really help me if we could shift away from the language of objective one is the technical part where we rely on technical expertise and everything else is kind of for community members or whatever, because actually there is a lot of technical expertise of all different sorts that informs land use and land conservation and land management. And there is a power structure that emanates from the conservation community that's because we have technical ecological knowledge, we are the ultimate experts. So chapter one is the real thing, because this was advised by, all due respect, Bob, to your expertise and Vermont Conservation Society. Totally respect, you have a field of expertise, but that is not the preeminent expertise that rules land use. There's a lot of different kinds of expertise that we could call on to understand what is good land use, what is good ecological function. So communications wise, I'd love to explore, can we step back from saying technical expertise is ecological, you got a master's degree in ecology.
So a couple of comments, Sue.
Yeah, if I could build off of exactly what I'm hearing and what you're bringing up, I'm returning to Act 59 2023, Section 2802, which is those conservation vision and goals, which starts with the high level description of what a functioning resilient Vermont looks like, and then goes into the 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 goals. And then it talks about how to reach the goals, which then brings in Vermont conservation design. And so the way this is put together is almost backwards from the way the law approaches it, which is starting with the vision of what Vermont looks like, and then moving to the goals that are established, which is, I think Section 3, and then bringing in, the assessment and prioritization, which necessarily includes Vermont conservation design because it's named within the law, but then opens the opportunity for other, supportive assessment methodologies or approaches to be discussed in that section. And so I do think conversations about framing of a future document is super important, and see the comments you're raising, Dean, is definitely resonating with me.
So we'll get some other comments. I mean, these are really good, and I think just in terms of process, just so you know, this is a technical advisory committee. You're contributing. That our job will be to take this and redraft and come back with new rounds and so on, right? So this is an excellent contribution. So did you ever get up?
Part of the reactions we're seeing is, I'm not an expert in this, but it is kind of jargony, I'll just say. And, and I think that if we really hone it down a bit to more plain language, it will be a more accessible document for people. Because I look at pathway 1A, and it's Vermont's conserved lands are not equally distributed across Vermont's 9 biophysical regions, which I've read the source documents, but if I'm, on the select board in Eden and I attend one of these meetings, I don't know what that means.
Okay.
This picture doesn't either.
So let's just get the comments on, and we can look at solutions. So Nick, yeah.
being more effective is the context thing I think you touched on. Like, in some ways, if the folks that have put this together, that it's cleared so much work in terms of analyzing phase one, both the conclusions and the concerns. But I do wonder, particularly when we start to think about the public, if there's an opportunity to list those just directly. This is what we heard and took away both conclusions and concerns, and here's how they are then represented in the objectives to kind of create that through line and in some ways help paint that map of where the objectives came from. It feels like, and if that's a way to do that, and I think part of it is, you mentioned like, there's these massive documents of a lot of the documentation. Those are hard to navigate. You get to questions of accessibility. There's a way to create that even like in a drop down of like, folks can find their concern that when they're coming to this to see if and how that was addressed in what's come up here. It feels like that's a nice opportunity to map. Yes, we heard this, or we know folks were concerned about this. Here's how that's been that's represented in the.
Like an FAQ maybe that pulls those things
and
out.
Just creates a map to point folks to where and how some of these objectives emerge from, not just the like conclusions, but also from the concerns that people had through.
Right, yeah, that's what I was speaking about earlier. So thank you for resynthesizing that.
So I do want to get, so Annie, I want to finish your piece and we'll go to Trey, right? But a little bit of a sort of homework. I think there's still, in my mind, a little bit, I heard the comment about we need more context, right? I heard the comment we need to maybe make it more accessible in terms of language, right? I would invite you though to think about these pathways and because I hear what you're saying in terms of that community, like leading with community, leading with how does it serve people and how do people find their place in it? Is there a way we need to think about reframing the pathways or is there a pathway missing, something like that? I mean, just not to wordsmith it in group format, but that's what I'd invite you to look at is, how would you reframe some of this if we took into the account? I mean, we could add the context to do all those pieces, right? But people might still get tripped up if the wording in the pathways is still kind of leading people down an inadvertent direction there, right? Anything else, Danny, just before we wrap up? Any other final comments to? Okay, we're good. Okay, great. So we're going to go to the next one. So Trey, you're on strengthen conservation capacity. Into the hot seat. Let's go. And we're going to go through, we're going to run until about noon. Then we're going to take a working lunch break, right? And then we've got a few other tasks we're going to do in that. But I do want to push on while we're running hot on this.
Okay. So the third objective is just around capacity. So I'm not going to read through it with you, but I'm just going to go very slowly so that you can interrupt me or raise questions. But this is not the how, because again, what we want to do in this process is flesh out each pathway into the how. But this is the how to do it smart, how to do it innovatively, how to do it sustainably, how do we build capacity. And I think again, I'm going to say one of the major learnings and takeaways from the first phase that we heard almost consistently wherever we went is that if we want to do better, smarter, long-term land protection, especially land protection that upholds the goals of connectivity and function, that we really need in the capacity to hold that land in perpetuity. The stewardship, which includes sort of the legal responsibilities to be a land steward, but also the work to take care of trails and access points, the work to reconnect streams and wetlands, the work to, right size culverts or to make forest roads, more healthy, the work to build smart working buffers that, protect water quality and productivity. So there's a lot of that how is going to get fleshed out there. This pathway speaks to some specific innovations and tools to make sure that we're able to do more than just kind of stay on the hamster wheel of trying to protect things as fast as possible, that we're protecting it consciously and we're taking care of it in the long term. And perpetuity does mean forever. So when something is conserved in perpetuity, it means there's an obligation to legally manage and take care of that land forever. That's a rather large charge, and it depends upon certain kinds of investments up front, but it also depends upon ongoing investment and commitment. So it ties right back to, do people feel pulled towards this and feel, community ownership? But as you go through this, the first one is around funding and financing. There's over the last 30 years, there's been a pretty, sort of a linear way you can track the investments the state of Vermont has made and that private organizations have made in conservation. You can track the conservation outcomes over that time. If we're working to increase permanent conservation by 2030, we're going to have to increase those investments. And not just for the acquisition of land, but again, more importantly, for the, intentional planning on the front end and then the long-term stewardship and management on the back end. That's where the capacity is even more important. I took that out of order and I started with steward and restore, because to me, that sort of it rises to the top. But what this pathway lays out is not just saying we need more funding, but for stewardship, but that we have to teach the notion of stewardship. We have to get to that ethos of land management and protection and, restoration, much more intentionally with our communities. That stewardship has to be something that we think about when we think about, conservation writ large. Pathway 3C is scale. People ask, is this only going to be about large tracts of land protected by land trusts or owned by the state of Vermont? And no, this pathway speaks specifically to wanting to be able to do conservation activities at different scales, at the regional level, at the local level, with planning commissions and local conservation commissions, and thinking across, one thing TNC maps really well is how does our forest in Vermont fit into the larger forest that extends from the Appalachian Mountains up into eastern Canada. So at that scale too. So down to the 4-acre area around a culvert that needs to be protected to draw down funding to replace that culvert and create aquatic organism passage and better resilience and all those things. Up to how is Vermont a linchpin in the northern forest? How are species going to be able to move across the Vermont landscape as the climate changes and be able to adapt and change and flow north, which TNC also, we probably want to get your slide sometime, Jim, that shows the trajectories of how species are moving. It's quite well documented and the science is really strong. And that's what that connectivity is about at the regional level. But beyond state support system, this is where we get into, this is not about the land trust or A&R or VHCB, but the many, many professionals out there who support conservation. How do we support and nurture those professions? The foresters, the surveyors, the appraisers, the attorneys who do this kind of work, the local conservation commissions having the right, resources that they need, select boards understanding this and integrating it into their planning along with hazard mitigation planning. The two go so well together. So how do we build that support and capacity into those systems? And then finally, I think one of the ones, especially in the context of a really different outlook with our federal partners on funding, how do we innovate to do some of this work in ways that we haven't in the past? There were some assumptions when Act 59 was debated and passed by the legislature, and I don't know why we would think that. I don't think we did think that America the Beautiful and the Biden administration would last forever. But the turn is so dramatic and so sharp that we have to really rethink the way that we do this. So what are the other ways that you leverage the creation of conservation outcomes? Just like the legislature and housing partners are thinking about different ways in the absence of all the ARPA money that built a lot of affordable housing. What are ways to innovate right now where we can work with communities and do that? Who are new funders? How do we work with organizations that donate land? So that's objective 3. It's not the how to do it, but the how to do it smart, efficient, innovatively, and with more resources.
All right. So questions, reactions, comments? Please, yeah.
No, that's actually not so bad.
So the record, none of us. You're editing your own comments, right? Good comment, bad comment.
So no, as I was thinking about this, I think this whole section, there's an opportunity to kind of think about the language framing more from a curiosity standpoint. So if I purchase 10 acres, it's not you telling me this is what you can't do with your land. This is, I'm gonna actually show you around your land and show you some ways that you can protect it, right? It's a different relationship with the public who are asked to be the stewards of this land, rather than, because what it reads right now is like, these are gonna be the restrictions that you have. Right? You have this land and to protect it because we know better. We know better. We got the master's degrees. We know better. It's saying, did you know you have this like
this strip of stream right here where that's really important because you have actual salmon runs that go through there, or not salmons, we don't have salmons here. We had trout. When I was down south, we had trout going through our backyard.
Salmonoids.
Yes, as well as like lots of other beautiful wildlife. But like recognizing what's happening along that corridor and how you can protect it, right? So it's a different type of relationship of saying we don't see you as the enemy to the environment, but we see you as the collaborators and us protecting not only what you have, but what we need for the state. So I think there's a way to rethink a little bit of the wording on this, but I feel where you're going with that, because that's what I would want to know. That's what I would need to know.
I think that's what this is context we'll have to build into every conversation we have and into this document in the front end and everywhere we can, which is that's exactly the posture. With conservation, we don't get to come and tell you this is what you're doing with those 10 acres.
That's what it feels like to the public.
Exactly. So we want to demystify that.
Yeah,
make it feel like an opportunity to learn and to have the support, like the support of conservation, which is sometimes financial, sometimes capacitated support, sometimes informatics support. So yes, if you see pathways to breathe, not pathways, but ways to breathe that into this, that feels like what we want people to be taking from this, is that this is meant to feel like an opportunity. From our perspective, this is meant to feel like pull. Right. Like we want to pull people towards this, not push them. Because if you don't want to conserve, you don't have to. And if we make people feel like they don't want to conserve because this feels outrageously impenetrable, then it won't hasten our work. It won't improve the quality of the outcomes.
Thanks, Trey. A couple of questions. I do want to just just intervene for a second. So if you just hold your thoughts, right? I want to just talk to you as somebody who's going to facilitate this process for a while, right? So I heard a couple of comments. So if you guys could just listen on this, right? Because a couple of you made comments about there's sort of this tone of people with master's degrees and so on telling us what to do, right? And I'm sure there's a bunch of people in this room with master's degrees who are very committed and really leaning into this. So I would really invite us to be all conscious and respectful of how we interface, because we do have people with different perspectives and different interests and different passions, right? But I think what's unifying here is everybody cares, right? And everyone's here to forward a larger sort of purpose here. And I know it's probably unintentional, but I do think we want to set the standard in here of being very conscious about what we say, that we're not unintentionally alienating or dividing inside of our own room, right? And I know that's not what you're intending, right? But I do, and I think the point of what you're saying is really valid, is we have to really think about making sure these documents are accessible. But I think we've got to develop the ability here to be able to come together and have some really important conversations and not kind of inadvertently pick at each other. I just want to say that, right?
And we cannot center whiteness. We cannot center that. That is not the center.
No.
We working in service of the rest of the state.
I understand.
The folks of us here are working in service of the rest of the state of Vermont. And right now it's an anti-government environment. So what we are expressing is what the public is feeling.
Okay.
So it is on us to check ourselves. Y'all good. Y'all got jobs. You got bennies. You got housing. You're fine. The average person does not have that security. So when you're saying this, what we are saying is I'm speaking for my former constituents as a former legislator. That would not resonate for them, right? Yeah. So it was only until I took the Planning Commission out of the boardroom and into the low-income communities where they started doing community engagement that folks saw themselves and saw those people who were stewarding this work as being a part of the solution. Otherwise, they were just the poor folks who were asking for a pathway or a walkway. Do you know what I'm saying?
I appreciate that.
I want to be careful on that and recognizing that we're all coming in with a huge amount of privilege. And when we're saying these things, we are saying, I'm not trying to be the voice of the public, but I'm recognizing very fully how this continually reads in a time of such political divisiveness that it's an anti-government environment across party lines right now. So we're stewarding the government and the state. So we have to just know that that's going to be that we're going to get that pushback. So how do we say, I see you. I totally see you.
Yeah. I want you to finish speaking.
I'm good. So that's what I'm just saying. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to recognize that many of us in this room are used to functioning in an ecosystem where our master's degrees, I don't actually have one, prioritize that there's a way of doing business, that there are code words that we are using, that can be incredibly exclusive. And I want to really appreciate the fact that Jean and Kaya and Ornella are going to push back against that. That is a huge energy suck for them to have to do in this space. And I just want to really respect that they're bringing that and they're showing up and putting their really important perspectives into this room.
I understand that. And I would say this, I think everybody is, right? I think everybody's bringing their perspectives and bringing their commitment, right? And I think our job is to meld that, because if we get that, we can use this as a testing ground to go what's going to resonate with the community or not. But everybody's bringing their particular passion here. I mean, that's why, you're in what you do and why you're at this table, right? I'm just saying, I think one of the big pathways for us to get to a really potent outcome is to really develop that ability to be able to really work through points of disagreement, or those areas where we may say, okay, what is the creative solution we haven't seen here yet, right? And we're only going to get to that in an original way if we're really honouring and respecting everybody in the room, and that's from everybody to everybody is what I'm saying, right? But I just want to throw that in. So Jamie, you had a comment, and then we'll come to Alex.
Yeah, something that I wrote down this morning, and I think it's even more important from some of this conversation. I think just with some of the terminology here, there's no doubt that part of the work is to strengthen the capacity to do conservation across all the mechanisms. The way we talk about it here, I think, reads a little bit about strengthening the capacity of the conservation community for the impact of our conservation investments. And I'm wondering if there's a way to word this. Go to pathway 3, for example. Like, just one example I would throw out: design and develop new programs and tools that help increase the place, quality, and impact of opportunities for landowners and communities. We need a different way of framing that than of our conservation investments for, pathway 3A. Increase funding and financing to support land protection, stewardship, and capacity to assist landowners, or something like that. Like, it's just, there's something, make it more relevant to the people that this is going to benefit versus more the insular work that we have to do. But it's just the terminology, I guess, that I'm hitting on.
Yeah.
I want to piggyback on that, because I'm curious. I'm still back at the Venn diagram. Like, is it just a terminology, or is it actually like a massive framing question of is the point that we're trying to center little c conservation permanent easement, or is our North Star we're trying to build conservation ethos in our community? And like the stewardship, when I heard you, Trey, saying 3A and 3B, 3A to me is clearly about what the conservation community calls stewardship, which means managing easements. Stewardship in the conservation community, as far as I know, primarily means stewarding easements, which means maintaining your audit office, your legal team, doing that process. To me, as a layperson, stewardship of land, it means a totally different thing. It means what you were describing, what's on my land, all of the salmonoids run through here, like, I'm gonna make sure that, like, I don't put my parking lot right next to it. That to me is what most people would think land stewardship is, unless you've had some adjacency to the conservation community, and then you would know, oh, stewardship means auditing parcels and managing contracts. And it costs a lot of money, and it's hard to fundraise for, because it's not that inspiring to be like, we have to perpetually forever fund a team of lawyers and auditors and drones to make sure that we're managing these easements. And so that's like a language area where I find it's an example of where I get disoriented in these conservation conversations, because I find the conservation community kind of slips between these two terms of stewardship as though they are one thing, but they are two really different things, right?
I think we're very conscious of that. It's a great shout out. And in this, we tried to describe stewardship, restoration, and management as 3 conjoined activities in 1A. Those 3 verbs or those concepts are linked together. Because I think we do feel like stewardship is often understood to mean more than what we often mean it as a technical term in the conservation world. And we want to get to more of the management and restoration. And stewardship obligations are upside down for most of the professional organizations who do this. The ability to even do that first thing that you said is undercapacitated wildly. So yes, and to all of those, I think that's how, in my mind, these different pathways and Objective 5 tied together is thinking about how do we not just bring along like our partners in the large statewide or regional organizations to do this, but local organizations to do this as well. But the more we expand the doers, the more all of those folks are going to need those capacities at every stage, right? So now we've described project acquisition and then that stewardship management restoration. And then there's a huge component before you get to the point where a landowner says, hey, I'm really interested. Oh yeah, we're really interested. Okay, let's go forward into this acquisition process. It's the whole, how do you plan? How do you implement this at the community level? How do you work to develop plans that
How do you plan permanent conservation is what you're saying?
Yeah, and which is, again, Act 59 says increase permanent conservation and semi-permanent conservation towards these two goals while centering this vision.
I want to like answer your question really directly. And I think it goes back to what Trey said earlier. We're not trying to solve like the broad question around land use and natural resource protection and community engagement through this process. It's primarily focused on permanent land conservation through public ownership or easement. And I think we're doing our best to try to be aware of the broader context and support it and be informed by it. But the core work here is around that. I don't know if you call it small C or big C. Permanent conservation.
But I'm learning to call it small.
So I think
legal.
That's how I understand the task. And I think we're trying to do that in a different way than that's been done in the past. That's been really insular and try to have these other touch points. But at the end of the day, it's focused on that kind of 30% of permanent legal conservation that we're charged for.
So lots of hands. So I want to just, if you guys can hold it, because Alex, you were making a comment earlier on, then Nick will go to you and then please.
Just sort of on the subject of community engagement and empowering the community, which seems to be is a real point we got to focus on here. We've been doing a project in Bristol, where I'm from, with our Bristol Conservation Commission and Middlebury College, in which we did like a camera trap survey of like prominent common landscape features around town. And then this presentation to the community members about, like, here's what's going on in your hedgerow prints and stuff like this. And are currently working to like synthesize that into a very, very easy to access document pamphlet form for new landowners. And the interest being, or the idea being to like, just people get fired up about finding out what's going on their land and what they can enhance in their property. Really minimal effort sometimes. Sometimes the lack of effort, like don't brush hog that,
Precisely.
And when that stuff is presented to them in really, plain language, pictures of cool critters, it's very powerful. And how that converts to permanent conservation, because as you say, that's the ultimate goal of this commission. There's work to be done there, but like, I think that kind of tool is really, really useful. Camera trap surveys in particular are easy to like crowdsource, we found we had a lot of luck with getting input from people via the fact that there's trailer cameras all over the place nowadays. And finding ways to like synthesize these things into really, really easy to access creates buy-in in the whole project in general. So that's a tool that I think we found very, very fun and useful in drumming up support around town, that I think could be done on a grander scale.
Right. And I want to come back to that, Alex, because that connects to something. But you had two comments. So Nick,
and then Emily. And Emily, We're even having some conversation here about what we mean by conservation, which I know has definitions and things like that. But I think as we think about public engagement again, too, like I know folks in the rec community have confusion about is conservation protectionism or preservation, and the idea of we're talking about permanently, durably, depending this 2030, 2050 definition of permanently protecting land in the public's interest. Like being trying to flip and kind of orient this project up front is like, this is about the public and the public's interest.
Yeah.
It's not about the government trying to own land. Because I think a lot of people view this process of like, there's an objective for the state of Vermont to acquire an additional 3% of land by 2030. Like that's our objective is to put, and I know that's not at all what we're talking about. So it feels like, I think a lot of us take that for granted because we've been so close to it for so long, but just I think some of those, not necessarily diffusing, but just directly addressing like, what is the purpose of all this? It's to protect land for the people, and that has these objectives which relate to the functions of those lands and the values they serve. So just thinking about like how we can make sure we're defining it in a way that is bringing everybody in upfront and addressing that standpoint about like, this isn't about owning land, it's about permanent protections for the public.
Yeah, it's a really interesting tension here, right? I think this is something we're going to have to play out, which is this, there's like what Billy said, right? It's like 30% protected, right? But what I'm hearing a lot of people saying is, how do we also frame this so that somebody who just has a hedgerow can feel like they're part of the solution, right? Or maybe they don't even have land. How do they see themselves in a conservation plan? And there's obviously a requirement to deliver the plan, but I think the context piece of this is really important, right? In terms of, this framing of, the values and the vision that goes with it and all the things you guys have been talking about. How's that cascade down so that people broadly can see themselves in it, and they may not be the landowner, right? But they see themselves in this plan somehow or other. So a really interesting tension. So Emily and then Jim.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is where I see community organizations like South Hero Land Trust actually having a lot to bring to the table, and not just community land trust organizations. But when it comes to stewardship, we didn't hold easements. Thank you, Vermont Land Trust, for holding those easements. We developed projects, we brought them to the table, we fundraised for them, we executed. But we really saw stewardship as a long-term relationship between our staff and the landowners. And that meant not just showing up and saying, let's talk about your hedgerow, which is awesome. And I love that. And we do like those kinds of, but also, you're going through a mental health crisis. Let us help your family. Let us like show up, because you and I are partners in caring for this land. And that means caring for your family. It means showing up when a dairy farmer is struggling with figuring out like how their accounting is working, and making sure that they're like using systems that are going to make their family farm sustainable. Like these sorts of things, I think, are a piece of conservation that are not held by the statewide conservation organizations. They're held by the community organizations. And I think they're really critical if we're thinking about like perpetuity. Perpetuity is not just a legal thing. It also means like a perpetual relationship between people in a landscape. And I don't know how that gets thrown in here, but when I think about stewardship, that's what I think about for stewardship.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So, Jim, you had a comment?
Yeah, this has been really helpful to hear everybody's perspectives for me. And I keep coming back to the vision that is set out in the legislation. That is the vision of the state of Vermont to maintain an ecologically functional landscape, right? And I think the more we center our work on that, and that in doing that, there are benefits to humans, to wildlife, to the economy of the state of Vermont, to the communities that we have, there's just a wide variety, like sustaining that ecologically functional landscape benefits all of us. So I think we need to, what's kind of lost in this document is that centering of that objective or that goal and that vision of this legislation. And that's what's bringing everybody to the table. And then the enabling conditions that are needed in the state of Vermont to get to that. And Billy said that and I agree that a lot of this is about permanent conservation. It's not just about permanent conservation. It's what do we need to do in the full spectrum of activities, from well-managed forest to riparian buffers that are esteemed and taken care of, that maybe aren't in any sort of protected manner. But that's bringing us back to that functionally, that ecologically functional landscape that sustains us. So what do we need to have that? So I think where this document sort of fell short on this is sort of a nod to those, or addressing those other softer C, big C, small C, whatever it be, italicized C, conservation efforts that are really important. So we need to keep that in mind, because that's kind of, in my read of the legislation, that's that 50 by 50 goal. But it doesn't mean we do the 30 by 30 and then we start the 50 by 50. We've got to be doing all of that at the same time. So that's that enabling condition we need to do. And then really like drawing out the community benefits that need to be like drawing out the community benefits of this work so that everybody understands they have a way to plug into this. And it may not show up like protecting or conserving an ecologically functional landscape may not show up in my community directly, but I know that maybe when I go out and access that land, I am able to do that in a way that is welcoming and supportive of my desire to prosper as an individual. And so I think we just need to like bring that back, center it around this ecological system that sustains us, and then build the enabling conditions and then make sure that people understand how they can plug into that and be a part of the solution.
Okay. Thank you. Are we doing a working lunch, Annie?
Yes.
Is lunch, when's it coming?
Can we take like
is lunch here or?
Oh, no. So what we have by way of food, and we want to take a short break for people to do one of two things or one of three things. One is just go and do something else for like 10 or 12 minutes because you need a breath. Number two, there's a cafeteria down the hall where you can get like sandwiches and stuff. And then number three, I put VCP put a smorgasbord over here of like snacks. So maybe it's smorgas. I don't know how you spell that, but anyways, there's carrots and hummus, there's little cuties, there's pretzels, there's seltzers, there's donuts, which is what I'm going to have for lunch. And so you can stay and continue conversations and grab some food here till 1 o'clock, or take 10 minutes and go grab a sandwich down the hall. But we want to get through the agenda, and we also had on the agenda for the working lunch, and maybe we can just iterate this together and come back to it, was a chance to kind of hear, and maybe we've already heard this, but we could take some time to write it all down. Like, what were the questions and topics that you want to spend more time on next time? So like, is it helpful? Like we've talked a few times about Bob coming back to our next virtual TAC meeting to do a deeper dive into how we did that VCD develop land overlay, how the 5 kind of pathways emerge that do define that kind of ecological center. And then maybe what you all want to really talk about is then how do we honor that while also inviting these other pieces and sort of to get to the nuance that Jim and others have been talking about. So anyways, I hope we can save a little bit of time for that. We also wanted to talk about, we moved the regional stakeholder sessions back. You want to make sure you got that mail, which gives us some time to do some more of these conversations and be better ready for that first round of input. We wanted to just give you a quick update on how working groups are going to work, but we may not dive too far into that. So anyways, those are a few different things to do between, say, 12:20 and 1. If people want to take a minute, gather their food here or down the hall or outside, and then we'll come back to that.
Yeah, I think the reality is it's going to take more than 10 minutes, right? If you've been to the cafe here. So let's rejoin at 12:30, right? If you can take a break till then, and then we have like a really intense half hour just to kind of get through this. I do think part of what we're going to have to work out is, obviously this is a draft, it needs more work, but we also want to engage other people. So we're going to have the maturity to be working on a draft that is not yet perfect while we're also inviting other people to come in to weigh in on it and so on. So I think this is, think of this as we're drafting for the next year, right? So, when, you're going to have some comfort with it being incomplete as we go forward in these engagement sessions and so on and get more voices coming into it, right? So let's rejoin at 12:30, right? And we'll kind of recap on this, as you said, right? And we'll dive into some of those other topics. Okay?
Set.
Great input, everybody. Thank you.
Eat the donuts. They'll go bad.
I need you.
Die. Should have said that way sooner. We should have said that way sooner. No. All the questions are different.
That's not what model we need working forward. What model do we need, right?
I can give you a picture of a Skinner. Of a Skinner.
So glad we're here. I'm gonna read it very
Yeah, no, it's right. And it's bad, they really did how. There's the buddy. Oh, on the water. And the reason. So, yeah. You might run into.
So that is happened
Yeah. Somehow it's
Because I don't know, there's a lot of this just sensitivity around it.
like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you? So.
We'll see
Partner guys.
No, so. Yeah, absolutely. It's consistent. Southern. It's neat.
It's a big gap between
Yeah, it's just.
you know, I think we should in the back. Like she's not you know,
Sad for.
that's
The staff there.
I mean, they see this, they believe that. That's, so all these folks say. Everybody has on their face. That's what y'all bring back. You know what I mean? So that's a second, that's why I think climate council. You could talk with them, their team about how they had to manage it. Because they also.
That's why I was.
A lot of.
I'll be all structured in by fair life, so I feel like this weird little. Pick up that.
Think there are people walking around.
I could figure it out, you know, like.
I'm glad to meet my son. Thank you. All right. I guess.
I did just want to check with you, what was your comment about being courteous and respectful directed at that meeting? Because I just want to, I do not feel disrespect to anyone in this room.
Yeah, no, it wasn't, and I said that it wasn't, I didn't think it was intentional, but it was like, it came up the third time, right? I think there's about, people got degrees and da, right? And I, you know, I want to make sure we all together here, right? So there's a lot of people here.
It's
very much involved in the same, right? So
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I think and that's what I'm trying to say is like that does not, that is not the credentials for like the number one decisions. But in the logical conservation space, there is kind of an assumption that the technical ecological expertise is the preeminent expertise that is essential to understand how to prioritize our land use, but like I have a message for improving record management because I believe that like our strongest functioning communities are the ones that are strong functioning agricultural economy. That is like, absolutely got into because I am an ecologist. and an environmentalist. Like literally, environmental studies make, like I got an environmental studied in this. So, it is not like disrespect people being masters. The concept is, can we anticipate a diversity of expertise as like determining what is the decision we come to and how we use our land.
That's, and I think, and there's another whole stream there of people understanding communities, right? And what activates people and how do people connect to land and all those. Those, I mean,
Maybe you might have
that's 2/3 of the 3/3 of
yeah,
Venn diagram.
got it, okay. Yeah, so talking about people's master's degree, you thought was.
I was just, you know.
To figure out.
I understand.
There's a whole person, okay, I just want to be respectful, there might be people in the room, maybe some of
Yeah.
Okay.
no, just people want to just all be mindful, just like I would. We're being quiet, and I was going, let's just make sure we aren't.
It's like, if you're especially coming from there, it's like, you're the.
And we're gonna come up with this. I'm gonna have so many.
I mean, they're all, they're
Game members, like, how do we just, this moment appear to be totally conflict or whole, right? How do we go through a process of finding what is a creative solution or pathway that perhaps we haven't thought of, right? And then maybe the question is ultimately at the end of the day, maybe we don't, right? But we won't know until we have a good go. It's like, how do we resolve?
You can't, I guess, talk to people.
What is the new theory?
It's a really important question, because that is not what happened in phase one. Like moving through together, tough thing.
Yeah.
It was like the divide and then everyone wrote a second letter from their camps. And then that's it.
So we did like I said, we did the forest products, strategic plan, we had these, and so they had 3 colors on them, like green, red, and yellow. And so we ended up getting down to this,
Go either way.
actions to put in. Each person would say, like, green was the go, red, they oppose it.
Yes.
Yellow, we need to talk about it more, and we just kept going until we had all the greens, right, all yellows. Mostly,
That tool.
so we just, and if we couldn't resolve it,
Yeah.
we need to keep working on it.
Okay.
It's a way to kind of.
Or not get, if you cannot, it gets to a certain point, which is why we had the opposing opinion. No, you have the opposing opinion and document the opposing opinion.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And you're just not gonna be able to find full consensus. And so rather than people feeling forced to get consensus, they can still say, and my voice is heard.
Yeah.
I need to make sure these ladies eat because that is too.
Nice. Yeah, it's cool down.
Pretty bad about eating. I should eat as well for us.
Forever.
Are you doing series or are you gonna do that after the break? That's what Andy was saying. She'll get like when we're doing a full break of 26.
It's a little metropolitan for my taste, but it's a nice town.
I'm gonna go use that.
I can't see him getting back like 30 years it is, right?
All well.
12 minutes, yeah.
Hope you want.
Yeah.
Take a little downtime.
Heinsberg's cool. We just did a place up on Finney Ridge Road. It's just north side. We're going out of town like 5 minutes. Stop on your left, up kind of over Children's Pond area.
Yeah.
I think it's technically in North Ferrisburg. It's just up 169 through.
Yeah.
One of those little roads off the side. You drive by a million times, you never.
Yeah.
Never knows this.
That nutrition.
Oh my gosh, this is a really good picture.
This is why I know you got like just looking outdoors.
Yeah, so she's
Through him.
now. And, it's fun to
It's
job there, so I need to.
Yeah. I do have time that we.
The better job you do of engaging everybody, the more complicated it gets.
well, I was gonna say, participating in rather complicated than to just put out a title that addresses the issues and let's get to them.
Yeah, it's gotta go. It's gotta go.
Right, I was like, yes, absolutely really great.
So I'm here representing back.
Leftovers from last night.
All the way to advocacy for my sports.
I'll leave
And
Trey's.
it's really interesting to listen to folks talk about like mistrust of housing. Because that's the biggest point we've got over money communities. That is never like. I was like, conservation history, you know.
The money for conservation and organic comes from
Trust has eroded in a way that like it's really tough, and like how we get that back. It's really brutal. It's like my thing with BHA. It's like we can do a lot of like management plan reviews and stuff, you know, for land trusts and whatnot, and it's always like trying to get the money community on board with the idea. You know, they're not just gonna come in here and then not listen to anything. They end up submitting things. And then one in every 10 or so, they do exactly that. Like completely undermines, like this was the thing I was trying to say. Trying to convince them.
Double-edged sort of thing. I mean, it sounds like which has like very small. It's a lot of farm fields and public access and everybody's dog on property. It's something the hunters are like, can't hunt here anymore because someone's down there. And then it's all over like.
And then should that happen? Oh, yeah.
The idea that a dog is like, the deer like the idea that there's like third lights season is like the end of how you get between my dog and their favorite tree.
There is just some moment in human history where like became your dog's God-given right to be anywhere. Just went through this in a way with the monkey house. Were you aware of that project at all? Yeah, it's really cool. It's super. It's an excellent property. Asia company did a great thing by giving the money from stuff. It's just awesome. Yeah, but it was one of that's exactly the thing. Like that, you know, this being 800. There's a feeder pond system that's been tracked. The same with 3 families, generations. And it became a sanctuary for dog walkers and certainly seemingly randomly selected amphibians. And it's all good, but the trust thing here matters. I mean, it's
so.
And the problem with it is, some of it, because everything's, the segmentation of all these properties is made a lot of people's concerns really valid, but that's the thing that, like, I think, and ultimately, is why I'm so enthusiastic about this whole project. The answer is more land. There's more space. Because, like, you know, I want to be respectful of people's right to not feel about being around, whether it's like real danger or not. They feel it. If they're not crazy, like, I don't really need to walking around from those like from people trees and guns around. I think it's not unreasonable. But as you just further segment these properties up, that concern gets more and more real. And people just rub shoulders in ways that good. For him. What's that? So DAC is a national organization that has a chapter that has a union chapter. So we have, then within the union, we have a state leadership board in each state. So I'm on that. So like, the New England board is like a person from each state. I'm not that person, but I'm on the state. Yeah, we have like basic areas, but and I guess actually 2 people per board in Vermont. That's one of, so one of the not the job I want. A lot of driving around. A lot of driving around.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know it well.
Every home and like the doing well.
Having you here.
Other than that,
I was glad to.
part of the challenge is build out, we're like, so it's like. There's teachers build out.
It's the hardest part, but there's nothing. Even the concept, one thing that I really like bringing in my head is like reading through the, hey, it's like we talked about the term permanently conserved. Permanently conserved doesn't display, you know, we're seeing this in the back of like whatever is like it doesn't not like it just got
Doesn't really matter.
give a shit. Or else it's just all, even like the Adirondack, you know, we think of that as, that's what I'm from. It's like, we think of that as like, I think, you know, most well protected things around, right? State, it's gonna determine any of you. So like, that's, there's nothing behind it. You know, you have to have people like, engage in buying. I was bring this up. Very conscious.
So this is
There's a reason I live in this place, I don't like the Adirondacks, I can't make a living. And I think the lesson really is because because there was a lot of collateral change that the APA accepted.
Should we, oh, looks like everyone's gone anyway.
Useful.
It's only Helen, I think.
Okay.
Oh, and Tracy.
Very. And some of that, literally, like, not.
There's a lot, you got like.
It's so nice. Okay, couple of mine, because I, like, and I like problems. You know, like, it's all.
I'm really glad we I'm doing the review sessions. 10 days on.
So it's like, I don't think we necessarily.
No, that's a great thing. We like to call.
It is led to like, like, keep out the windows. I didn't know.
Spot on.
Oh, yeah, sex overcome that.
Especially given this.
Did you hear all about the Whitney Park sale last year? This, the last like gigantic. Is this? I know.
But
just got sold. It's Mary Lou Whitman died at 98 last year. Just that 50 million.
The observation about like.
Oh, the person else is
Jamie Vidal, how are you? The other side of the key and
and then like,
yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So, but when he dies, try to lay down marks, we're going to get the solution.
We have involved in the high school, get
Yes, no, not in an inner circle way. And it's just to share with you, like, it was part of the legislative process. Yes. And it didn't happen. It was a moment and it didn't get the support of the government. Folks, and try and stress, but I think it's around
that land is.
I thought maybe just the agency. I think to Trey and PhD's credit, it doesn't say. This needs, we'd like to invest in this larger process, public, funding, public needs. And so And then the legislature has to try to recognize that there's like, there has to be inclusive, so the vision, and some of the things that we're adding to the legislation, beyond the 30 by 30, by 50. I encourage you to, as you think about this, think about the breadth of this, what the plan can be. It can be the conservation mechanisms, these goals, and then there's a much more sort of like broader vision to remain, keep the buy-in going, and so.
It's a vision of the future of conservation on this lot, right? And then this 30 by
But
30.
also maintenance of other, but also other. Our society. Could be a way to map this plan so that it meets a vision that feels like it's resonating versus that the 30 by 30 goals have to be at odds.
Yeah.
But that tension is going to be there because of all the house crisis and then.
And it's obvious, that, you know, there's no appetite for it. I mean, we could do a 30 by 30, like just to say cut and dry. Technical document, right? Sort of what Billy and some are doing, right? But I don't think that's me.
It could be like a component. Or it should be a component. Yeah.
No, it doesn't make context. That doesn't. It's precise. Context is precise.
Well, you guys have all of some text stuff. Conservation is. It works with willing landowners, there's in our tax points, with how we can land, how it's done. You know, how the community needs, and how the cost of that, or where can it be at odds with other societal needs.
And I think we should have that vision in the legislation.
Yes.
Something said at every document, like every document.
Yeah, orient, not just meeting hard goals.
And I think we should say that this is a value that is shared by a lot of people in Vermont.
Yeah.
Oh, so we should get started. All right, guys, so should we regroup? Not? All right, everybody, we're gonna get going again.
Yeah.
Thanks. Nuts to you.
That's my favorite line from the Lord of the Flies.
Okay.
Nuts to your ass, but Piggy. You have a rock band called Nuts to Your Asthma Piggy. That was early ambition.
I want to just do. I think we can skip that.
Yeah,
but we need to do.
Yeah,
because that's our first.
And shout out to this. That's really like a July.
We'll give them an update.
Yeah, the
next call.
Yeah. And they have, but then how long do we want the call to be?
Well,
I think we want an hour and a half if we're going to do content and discussion.
Yeah.
And then what else do people want to talk about?
Yeah.
I think those are our two things, and then what?
Okay. Oh yeah, the remaining questions is okay. Okay, so not everybody's back, but let's dive in right in the interest of time. So there's two things we want to spend a bit of time working on today in the remaining part, and I just want to take a few minutes. So this is basically an update, right? And we can give you more information as we go. But then I think we want to talk about tabling any questions or steps like that, and then next steps. So we've been talking about these regional stakeholder groups. Fortunately, we delayed them by a month, right? So that gives us a little bit more time to kind of get our group thinking going. We're proposing holding 4 sessions in this first round around the state. So just think of kind of 4 different corners.
I can even be more specific.
Please.
We don't know which place and which day, but we're thinking down at Ascutney, somewhere up in the East Burke region, maybe at Burke, over in the town of Burlington, and then down in either Brandon Town Hall or somewhere like that in Rutland County.
Are you envisioning these as all in person?
Yeah, with an ability for people to, if there's a presentation, to virtually link in, here are the presented material, but the major activity is going to be an in-person World Cafe type activity, which is hard to do. Not possible, impossible, yeah.
Just a thought might be, I mean, it sounds like you guys have already thought about this, but you know, if there's a virtual option.
Yeah.
Just to do an all virtual one.
We did talk about that, right?
Yeah, so-
And we were sort of playing with two ideas. One is to like take the presentation on one and film it and make that available, right? Like, so put that on the project website. And if there was interest, we thought a virtual one would be better than trying to provide a virtual option at each venue, because those hybrid things tend to be a nightmare, right? We would design a different process, obviously, for a virtual program, but these were the in-person ones we were looking at.
Yeah.
Is somebody coming in? Okay.
A virtual one.
Did you get them in?
No.
Just hang on a sec. Let me just take care of this.
Thank you. I was trying to not interrupt.
All right. So we're looking at those, we can see the dates here. These are to be confirmed, but that's what we're working on, is the sort of last 2 weeks of July. We thought a Wednesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday sort of combination.
We are going to try and finalize that later this afternoon and get back to you ASAP on the actual dates and the actual places so that you can begin to think about them. But there's a couple moving parts that we didn't quite resolve. So those are 4 days we know we can do it. And as opposed to doing 2 per day and doing like a huge hustle, taking the time to get down to communities ahead of time and be able to linger afterwards and, you know, take full advantage.
We'll hope that we'll participate beyond, that will participate in the actual listening sessions.
What's the expectation?
Like, what is our
I think
role?
us to show up in the listening sessions.
Yes, there's no expectation that you have to do that, but we were going to encourage people to help us, you know, pick a region where you feel like you could be there or two, but also really to help get people out. So what we know there's just a lot of stakeholders out there who we've already heard from who are interested. So crowdsourcing, inviting people to those. Many of you have sent stuff back to me per my request of like, hey, here's some, you know, stakeholders in different regions or statewide orgs that have regional presences that you should think about inviting. If you haven't done that, we would love to just get names or orgs and contact information of folks. We'll probably also take advantage of organizations like Kate's, where we can be like, all right, can we count on your listserv, or can we count on the VAPA listserv? Can we, you know, because we want to make sure that like the public is aware of this. And then, but we also want to make sure that people who are doing this work who just don't know about this also know about it and are able to be invited and get materials ahead of time. And and also that way they can also be ambassadors to like, hey, I'm going to this thing and there's all these materials on this portal. Here's how you look and here's when it is.
Are they in the evening?
No, they're going to be afternoon sessions, late afternoon.
After work late afternoon or like?
Yeah, we're trying to, what we found often works is that gap between sort of work and evening, right? So it doesn't take too much out of either, right? And we find that you can often in these sort of settings, you'll get more people coming to those, right? Like a 4 to 6 or a 3:30 to 5:30, something like that, right?
It'd be worth doing if you're gonna do a virtual session, do it at a different time, because you've just cut anybody who has childcare pickup
Yep.
out of participating.
Without a spouse.
Oh, you're gonna say even with a spouse.
No, yeah.
Yep.
That mess.
Okay.
I would also just check on when local select boards meet. If you have conflicts.
Yep. So the RPCs that Tasha is part of the statewide organization of regional planning commissions and commissioners are going to help us to host these. And so that's maybe one of the things that we can talk to you about is like, okay, like Tasha, when did all the select boards meet? Is Tuesday a bad day? Is Wednesday a bad day? Is work a bad time? So that's why I think we're going to take a little bit more time to get that right.
May I offer make a
Yes, please.
Particularly if you're trying to pull in the general public and not just folks that are working in the professional sphere, find something that's already existing and tag onto it. Because there's also a piece of people are burnt out, people are falling apart and they're crashing out everywhere. Going to an additional meeting for this very specific thing is not gonna happen. I wouldn't go.
Okay.
I'm always your worst case scenario. I would not go. But if there's already a community event of some sort, that there could be an opportunity to tag on with folks, there may be something on those days.
Like farmer market?
Yeah, things like that. Then you'll have an opportunity to connect with people. in those spaces, because you'll also either only get the same players that are always gonna go to everybody's meetings, but you're not gonna get the general public. And so that's just what we've also learned in community engagement right now, in this moment in time. People
Yes.
are like not gonna take a
Yeah, we might end up with a multi-tiered approach too. Like there might be, I think those type of things, going to events with some information, sort of light touch sort of engagement could be really.
Well, no, you could still have the listening session because they're already there.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're not making.
Yes, and rather
They're already
than
there.
either or.
Yeah.
So to follow up on this point is when I hear stakeholder, I'm not necessarily thinking general public. So that's what I'm trying to just sort out. Like, is this a stakeholder group or we're like engaging with existing organizations and their networks, or is this like we're going out to the general public?
Both, yeah, stakeholders is a generalized term for everybody. It's supposed to include both the organizations and the public. That's because that's who's in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
That has a stake in it.
And in this case, the act is helpful because it defines, it says these are the stakeholders you shall receive input from. And so we want to make sure that we do direct invitations and then also hold it open to and pull the general public. The act also says have at least it says have 12 meetings.
Right.
We've had like 120 meetings so far, literally. But we have these next 12 meetings where we're both invited stakeholders and general public. So that we have, that's all there is to say.
And just be in the interest of time, it's gonna get on. So there's obviously some mechanics to work out. The focus of these sessions, right, and that's going to be relevant to what I'm going to ask you next, right? The focus is we really want to take out a working document or something of a document that is around these objectives and pathways, and we want to get people to react to it, right? And we particularly want people to connect the dots to the local part of their world, right? So where do they see successes in this or challenges, or where do they see some of these things having potential or already being applied at a local level? So we're trying to create that connection between kind of big, lofty sort of objectives and pathways and what that might mean at a local level, right? So our format for this is we're looking at doing a fairly 30, 45-minute presentation, really starting with the vision that's in the legislation, working our way down through to, phase one, what came out of that, down to this, right? And then I'll have a whole bunch of sort of interactive stations that people can go and contribute to. So it's got a little bit of presentation, but then it's got a lot of informal discussions and data collection where people can kind of weigh in on, put things on maps about, things that are happening and so on. So we wanted to, and we're early days on creating, but we wanted to be sort of really interactive, really engaging, that we'd have people there at those different stations to be able to talk to. So it's sort of got this educational component, an awareness raising component, and a fairly strong input component. Yeah.
If someone sees the notice but can't attend, are you taking some kind of written comment or input? And
well, that's where I think the virtual session will come in, right? So we haven't got to full details on that, right? But we were talking about doing like little mini surveys that that you could, if we had say little posters on some of these pathways, people would contribute to that. We could provide that more broadly. I'd be worried about context, right, missing by not having the presentation piece, but we can think about that, how to figure that out. Yeah.
I'm curious. I don't know the answer. We're proposing to bring together people both who work in the field or related fields, or people that this group here has identified, and prepare them with a bunch of background information, and then also also invite the general public, but they won't necessarily have had the benefit of those background materials.
Thank you.
And I'm just curious about the dynamic that might create. And I don't know if you have experience that would speak to that. Or if it's not important.
No. Well, I mean, I'm understanding what we're saying. They are going to be providing some of that background is as part of the presentation. They won't know why they're there. And I know that most folks would know why they would come if, absent that, but,
Well, I think we'll invite people to register to come. It will drive them to our project portal where a lot of that background material will be if people choose to access it. And then we will, with people we're like sending an email to and saying, hey, we're having this thing in your region, would you like to come? We can attach the link and say, go here to see this, and this, kind of like what we sent you all. But
is this meeting have to be publicly warned?
that's a complicated question, and we are going to publicly warn them.
Okay.
but I don't think it has to be. I don't read the open meeting law to apply to David's work in organizing these meetings. It's not VHCB holding a meeting and our board making a decision. It's VHCB facilitating a process through a facilitator who's doing that.
Okay.
But I think with these regional meetings, we want to, as much as possible, do all the things that open meeting law calls for, or if we can't, to do something that creates the same access and transparency. Like, it's hard to have a good virtual option to a World Cafe experience. So how can we provide an alternative to that for somebody for whom that's inaccessible? So that we're more, if you want to talk more about that, I would love to follow up.
Yeah, there's some lessons learned, I think.
Okay. So last question, then we got to do some other stuff. So, yeah.
It's less of a question, more a comment. The climate action office did a whole bunch of engagement for the food action plan.
That's what I'm saying, there's lessons.
And so, yeah, if, I'm sure Sophie would be happy to talk to you all about what worked and what didn't, and
Perfect.
in making that happen.
Thank you.
All right, great. So the general question I have for you, somewhat rhetorical maybe, right, is we're at this point, right? Got some feedback today. We want to take the essence of this out to those regional sessions. What do we have to do to get that to the point where you're good with that? Knowing we're in a draft, right? So we heard lots of good stuff about context, drawing some thread lines from phase one and so on.
What else, right?
What else, right?
Yeah.
What else do we need to do? We can reframe some of the language on this, and we all got good notes on that, right? So, yeah.
I'd love an opportunity as an advisory group to have a dedicated conversation to, are we orienting towards conserved acres in permanent conservation or durable conservation, or are we oriented to the vision statement of this statute? Like, what is our North Star? Because I actually think we're not all on the same page with that. And that means the whole pathway structure is like means something totally different to each person who's reading it, because Billy reads it as permanent conservation. It's like a huge...
So, Jamie, you were involved in the development of this, right? So what, give us a take.
There was a lot of discussion in the legislature about making it more inclusive. It was a multi-year, effort in the legislature. And there were like a lot of revisions and attempts at trying to get to the right point of this. And there was a lot of work with committees to expand the conservation plan to address, and if you look at the charge, it's not just a plan for the conservation goals. It's to implement the vision as well. And also there's a list of, like, we also want to maintain existing investments and other programs that are important and identified. So it's ambitious, like the work that we have to do here. So we do have to think about the best mechanisms to advance the goals, but also to try and advance, there's other aspects of implementing a greater framework in a plan.
Greater framework meaning more. So what I heard you say of, like, if what's in the center of the Venn diagram is trying to build all of the tools we have to have people living and to build a functioning ecological landscape that includes people. That's what's in the center of the Venn diagram, and then easements are one of those three objectives. Okay. That, like, are we there altogether? Or I know Billy at least is not, and that feels like a pretty significant person to be like, no, what's at the center is permanently conserved acres. I don't really know how we have these conversations with stakeholders or move this process forward if there's not a clear vision statement for this process, that it is either we're focused on easements because, like, there's as one puzzle piece in a broader puzzle of food security roadmap, blah, 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 like that's what this project is easements. Or if we're talking about the vision of the statute, which is people living in a functional ecological landscape, and easements is one of those.
Is it either or? Isn't it both? Like what I heard Jamie saying?
Yeah, but the durable was for the 30 by 30 goal. And that may look at mechanisms like easements. I mean, permanent.
Right.
And that may look at like easements, and then the durable mechanisms were the 2050 goal. And then there's an onion, like there's different layers to it, and then there's an outer layer, which is like other programs that are really important. Like, let's say the current use program is really important in Vermont. We may decide the legislature wasn't necessarily thinking that was durable, But we can acknowledge it as a very important program in Vermont that should be in the conservation plan and supported, as well as a whole bunch of other programs that may or may not be durable, but there's a place, or permanent, but there's a place for them in the plan.
Okay, so my, sorry, I got really disoriented. My hope is that we could have an open conversation where we really queried this and said, like, are we all on the same page on that? Like, can it be both? And I think part of what I come up against personally in these conversations is that the conservation community has tended to be quite insular for hundreds of years, 150 years. And pretty limited in the values that it prioritizes as a community. And then it assumes that, I think you mentioned public good, like, oh, the goal here is to do land conservation for public good, but who has been able to participate in the conservation community about what defines public good is very limited. And so there's a lot of public good needs that other people have that have not been at this table. And so if we're talking about conservation, like whatever little C, I don't know which C, we're talking about conservation that serves the public good of a more expansive populace, then we need to have that conversation of what are those public goods and make that meaningful to the people we're trying to talk to.
All right, so let's take, because you raised that a couple of times, right? So tabling any topics for future discussion, that's what you said. Can we find time to?
That's just what I feel I need to take this plan forward and out.
Okay, got it. So we'll do that, right? Let's look at other remaining, anything else from people to table as a topic. Remaining questions and answers, and then we've got this proposed TAC meeting on the 3rd, and then we've got an in-person one, which should be in your schedules for August, but we have those regional sessions in between, right? So we're hustling here, right? We're gonna have to be sort of making the boat as we're sailing, right? And we talked about that maybe this is a chance for Bob to come and talk about Vermont conservation design, or we could flip that to another discussion, guidance. But I want us to keep in mind, we want to be going to those regional sessions with something that is representative of where we're thinking, right? And it's a draft, it's a starting point. We want people to weigh in on it. They're going to have different views and perspectives as well. What do we need to do to get this ready that you're comfortable with, Nick?
I think we've talked a lot about context and framing and stuff being super helpful, and whatever the public version's website. I think too, being super explicit about why we want people to come, what they will do there. Because I think sometimes there are these meetings where it's like, come figure out what's going to happen once you show up, like everybody interested. I think if that could be distilled down to the type, what they will do and the type of input they'll provide, because I think that people will get them interested about how they're going to weigh in these principal steps. I think important just to
and invite them to think ahead of time. If
are you going to be engaging?
Our question is, come with some examples of things that are working that illustrate these values. You need to think about. Come with some examples of things that you'd like to improve or change in conservation practices in your community. Come with some suggestions about how to make these things.
And they will be doing rotating stations or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And I think we would want people to think ahead of time. And so both in the invitations and when you register, I think it won't be like homework per se, but like.
Well, I think that helps address some of the asymmetry you were talking about. If there are folks who are reaching out to invite them to come, if that open invitation also includes what we're going to be doing and things to think about, everybody comes with some level of preparation for that. So you feel like
if you could only read these two documents, these are the two to read.
So we got 6 minutes, right? So please.
Just quick, it only says draft on the cover. It should probably have draft watermark or say draft somehow on every page, because we've had huge issues and it always helps when you have that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do have a question.
Oh, yes, please.
It's actually not about, I feel where everybody's going with that, and I think y'all will resolve it outside of here. The meeting in June, is there the possibility to make it a hybrid for accessibility purposes?
This will be all virtual.
This is virtual.
Okay.
But if anybody needs a physical location to come and plug in, we can offer that at VCP.
Yeah, no, it's more, I know virtual is helpful for accessibility for people with distance and long distance, but however, literally for different folks and different brains, in person actually some works for some of us better.
Yeah.
So as an accessibility.
We can offer an in-person
location. That's the language of accommodate.
Yeah, and we're sort of designing this so that we want to have fairly regular, invite everybody together, these type of perhaps longer meetings where we can thrash things out, and we want to have shorter like updates and kind of shorter topic that we can just do by Zoom into space, right? So we're working out the schedule to sort of match that flow of the bouncing ball, right? And we'll get that to you quite soon. Alex?
I think, so if I try to put myself in the position of somebody who coming to one of these meetings without much background in the conservation space per se, I think what would make my head spin a little bit reading through this is what are the tools and like a way that this can play out that lands you with such and such a result, you know? And I don't know exactly how it feels like a little bit what's missing in this is a description and inventory of the tools. And like, examples, I think a person coming to this who would feel engaged and interested and take part after they left would need a real understanding of like, what, you know, how do we go through identifying these objectives on said property and get to this result? And whether that be presented to them in form of like a mock situation that is laid out for them. Yeah. I don't know, but something like that I think would be really useful to people.
I was talking last night with one of the project team. We were talking exactly about that, and glad you raised that because I meant to ask this earlier. Like when we're running these, we were saying, would it be useful instead of only having talking heads? You know, people with like master's degrees like me, I have like 9 of them, so I know nothing. But let's have some people from these communities be part of the presentation. So somebody we worked with to conserve a farm can come in for 5 minutes, tell their story about the how and the why. And then somebody who did an access project, how and why. And that'll be different in each region. But we also create like contact points and champions within the regions that way beyond you all.
Yep.
And it will bring it to life because then people are like, oh, I've driven past that farm like 100 times. So conservation helped that family to do X, Y, and Z. And if the farmer's being honest, they might say, and it limited me from doing, you know, A, B, and C. These are double-edged sword tools sometimes. So I think that would be really powerful, but wanted to run that by you all as like de-expertise this is what we've heard all day. So reflect that back as a potential way to engage people in these sessions. We'll need your help to identify who those people might be.
Yes,
I think we can
that route.
do that.
I'm looking at the legislation again. This is a plan about implementing the conservation goals of the Vermont conservation design. And I hang.
But it's not, Jim, because it has a whole value
I
statement.
know, but I'm just starting.
So much broader.
I know, but I'm just reading. It says the conservation plan in consultation shall develop a plan to implement the conservation goals of Vermont conservation design and meet the vision and goals established. So it's that. All I'm doing is I'm bringing that back to center the conversation and reacting to your Trey, like, yes, great idea, but I would encourage you to think about projects that were in the design, in the network that was identified and how that advances conservation. And you can think of a whole lot of ways that that's done that maybe aren't permanent conservation. It could be a lot of other stuff, but the more I think you center on VCD, the easier these conversations are going to be. Everybody would kind of at least have something to anchor around.
I think we would, I mean, speaking for like the way that we look at stuff and the way that your organization does is that that's a major driver in our analysis. So I think we would be looking for parcels and projects and places that are the features of these different values that are showcases. So this, if I'm going to say my farm, this farm has these different conservation values. It has these different agricultural values. It has this social value. It has this access, you know, like, so I think we would want to pick people whose work with conservation, you know, is an example for all of us, rather than ones that it's just like the only person we can find who, and we don't really have a reason for doing it. So I hope it would be inherent that we would be looking for like things that center Vermont conservation design. And we believe that Vermont conservation design, I know this won't put this to bed. We should just keep talking about all these things. We have to give ourselves permission to not finish any of these things, but I don't think anybody working at VHCB and the state intended to decentralize Vermont conservation design. But as you've heard all the colleagues here today say, is like, that ain't the communications hook that's going to work best with people. So we need to figure out a way to pull people towards the sort of the values and goals that Vermont conservation design helps professional organizations center, but also say, how does this help you meet your needs as a family or as a collective or as a community? Because that's what I think the sweet spot that we're looking for is outcomes that do touch on one or more of those objective two categories while also being examples of really thoughtful, environmental protection, while also being innovative and thoughtful and streamlined, moving to things quicker, having less friction on public dollars, taking less time of land out of landowners' lives to not having a 5-year conservation process because it takes so long to work with VHCB or something like that. Those are like, we want to find things that allow us to talk about all that.
That's right.
Right, great, Trey.
Is there a place there where then we would gather information about how to evolve the tool? Then we would know what's wrong with the easements. We would learn how the easements need to change for them to adapt to the future of conservation. We would right?
And since David's going to wang me in the head if I keep talking, I'll
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
just yeah.
For your patience.
No worries. So 30 seconds, right? June 27th, we've got, say, an hour, 90-minute virtual meeting.
90 minutes.
Do you want to have an update on Vermont conservation design, or do you want to work together to review our next iteration of this, which will be your last chance to weigh in on it before we develop materials for the regional stakeholder group sessions?
But not your last chance overall.
June's conversation.
Can we do that in person instead of?
That would be better in person, yeah.
Yeah. So we can
My conversation and Vermont conservation design.
we can put that in the agenda in August, right?
Basically,
Yeah.
do what you said.
Okay. June 27th.
So
how much appetite do you have to go through the next draft of this?
June 20.
What do you want to know more about Vermont conservation design?
Or try to 7-10 split that and do 45 minutes on each.
Yeah, I'm hearing questions about what are better topics to talk about on Zoom versus in person.
Yeah.
That's
So if we took the June 27th is halfway between us and going out to talk to folks. If we could revisit this the next version of this document, that would be helpful to us. But if you'd rather spend the time having a more open-ended conversation and hearing from Bob, we could also figure out a mechanism to hear back from you separately about the document. I just think you've built upon each other so
Any of
well.
these entities to host a Zoom call so that folks could just be on it, separate from this project, saying, hey, we're gonna go through and talk about what the Vermont conservation design actually looks like, and folks can just hop on if they want to. Is that a possibility?
Hang on, we've got two questions on the table. So Trey's was first, right?
But yes. Would people be good with an agenda that's like
Focused on getting prepared for the listening session.
and but also giving this group more time to grapple with conservation design?
You can't do it in 90 minutes.
Both of those
in
things?
90 minutes.
No, that's not what you said.
Well, I was saying, could we take do a deep dive for half an hour? It's two things, yeah.
On the same meeting though,
Yeah,
on virtual.
yeah, and not having the do we do these values conversation until we're back together in person?
That's fine.
Yeah.
Do we have time to have that in-person meeting before our, these sessions?
No, well, we're conscious of people's schedule, right? So we flagged this one obviously, and then this one here.
I guess my question is, your question kind of has to be resolved for these listening sections, or we're not kind of all pulling the same way. Am I
For
right in
my
that?
sake,
No?
I can just shelve it and good luck with the listening session. It's not
Bringing up things that I think people are all think seriously about.
Well, I thought we got to where it wasn't it wasn't either or. I mean,
that was my reading of the act personally, that these are not mutually exclusive propositions, but you also seem to feel differently about that. And I'm very interested in understanding that perspective because it's important. But it does seem like we got to get that kind of hashed out before these.
I would suggest we table it for the 7th and have some time there. We're going to have a whole series of these kind of topics, right? That we're going to have to work through as we go forward, right? But I heard that there was enough understanding that we're dealing with. There's a outcome that we have to deliver, but there's a context and a vision that's really important in the process, right?
I wonder if this next meeting, because this document's going to be really important, like if it's going to be handed out, that we
Post it,
try and
yeah.
make sure that it's in a good place. I mean, Vermont conservation design is important. It should orient our work, but I think that to me isn't as important as making sure the document reflects a lot of the our shared values and the input today. And I think if we add more of that context in the beginning of the document, that I do think we're gonna get at more of an understanding that it is laid out as more of a, I think, meeting some of
It
the
would at
goals
least
that we have in
sharpen,
here.
it would at least sharpen that conversation.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
do you want to edit it and then send it out for a written response? Is that?
Oh, yeah, we'll send it to you, but then we'll come together on this. We'll set up a time where we can talk it through, right?
Can I suggest, so I actually can't make the 27th, and I don't know if there's other folks that, summers are really busy, right? So just acknowledging that in case there's other folks in that boat, can we think about like written comments or some other process that allows, for.
I was gonna say, we can
pick
set
up
that up
anytime, right?
And we might send out like a little poll that says, would you like to come to a meeting that's not a formal TAC meeting, but a meeting where Bob and Annie talk about objective 1. It's gonna be on this date. If you would like to do it, this is an opportunity. We're gonna do it again at this other time if you want. So we could do some, Bob, I'm not trying to clear your time, but we keep talking about your presentation here, but maybe we could do some info sessions that we poll you all to see what would be most helpful and or like get some stuff out there, or so that there's opportunities for that. The other thing I wanted to mention.
We're way over time.
I know, but stipends. So if participating in this and doing the work to be here is, will you please talk to me offline if your organization getting you here needs to have a stipend, or if you getting here needs to have a stipend, including for the time to do these extra things like prepare and read documents and send things. That is built into our budget. And we mentioned that on the fly at the end of last time, but I need to mention that again. I'm the person to contact, but then we'll be working with Future IQ to do that. There is a process for that. It's a little formalistic, but we do have an ability to support people in and out of meetings at an hourly rate. Right.
Trey, are you gonna send more information about the working groups? Because I guess I'm trying to wrap my
Yeah,
head
we'll
around
send that
how
out
fits
to you.
in. So can you just follow up by email, not now?
We're going to do a little, the one we did on the background to the technical advisory committee. We're doing something like that for the working groups as well. Right? Yeah. So there's going to be lots of those kind of updates just for your information, right? We really want to make sure our time together is kind of wrestling with the challenges. Okay?
Perfect. Yeah.
All right. So I want to wrap that up because we're over time, right? I apologize for that. That's not really our MO normally, but maybe Trey, I don't know. I just want to appreciate you all. I just want to appreciate you all. I think this is it's just such a really interesting topic, right? Lots of energy and tension around it. We clearly have to close the gap between the storyline of phase 1 into phase 2. I think we really have to bring the context in and sort of recast this inside the vision and that big picture. But I would just really encourage us all to continue to think about, okay, how do we lean into this and how do we come together as a group of people who are really committed to this outcome or set of outcomes? And how do we work together to just really get the most out of this in terms of our personal time, but also the experience and the product and the narrative around it, right? And as I said, we are going to be looking to you to be part of that narration. And if anybody's got time, Brittany will just start capturing short videos with people. But we're going to do that all the way through as well, right? We're going to have lots of voices of the community from the regional sessions and these meetings and so on, right? So with that, thank you very much, right? We're going to hang around for a little bit. If you've got any questions. Brittany.
Before we break, I'd like to take a group photo.
Oh, there you go.
So, that's it.
Can we center it around conservation design over my Bob?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Watch it, Joe.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I come early and stay late.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's how I think of time. Yeah. That's why I guess I'm sorry we didn't get it.
27th.
Please feel free to ping and we'll set up time. All right.
And you got another meeting or are you like talking?
We doing it on this wall?
Yeah.
Oh, this wall. Sorry, I was kidding about these.
Okay, everybody have this time?
Advice only stay for the photo.
Sir, are you?
No, Ollie's going.
Should I say? We all look so sad when I said that. I think,
Yeah, we'll have to cry a little. No, I guess if you need to go, then you should go. But we're gonna do another group photo. You do?
Sorry.
Quickity quick if you want to be in the photo.
Think you made it.
I'm gonna stand in the way back. Photo's optional. That's why I said if you want to be.
Not a very good photo. All right, 5 seconds. 5.
Come on, squeeze in, come on, come
We
on.
might need to sort.
We need to go like-
Need a soccer ball.
Yeah, like the, I can really, I can really, I'm gonna do it like a football.
All people in the back, come on, squeeze in. We've all done this
Beautiful,
before.
okay? You're the only one.
Uh,
Two. All right. 1, 2, 3. Gorgeous, thank you.
Thanks, Brittany.
He is in bad shape, Kyle.
I get
You never want to get down unless you've got a plan ahead. You gotta get out.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you.
You as well.
And nice working with and hearing something.
Yeah, that's a cool one.
That's a cool one.
Yeah, so were you involved with Newton on that, or is that?
Newton was the client.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, we worked quite a lot on that. Our,